our Super Tuesday coverage in just a moment, hosted by none other than Neil Cavuto. That all starts, well, in a matter of seconds. It starts, in fact, right now. I get to say goodnight, New York.
You're watching Fox Business coverage of Super Tuesday. Here is Neil Cavuto.
Welcome, everybody. Well, we are 3 out of the 14 states now that are having crucial primaries. 1,357 delegates up for grabs, 2/3 the amount you need to get the Democratic nomination. Remember, that's 1,991. Here's a look at what states we can call right now. For Joe Biden, Virginia. For Joe Biden, North Carolina. For Bernie Sanders, Vermont. And right now we're looking at Alabama, where polls are just closing, and that looks like it will be for Joe Biden. So 3 of the first 4 contests that we can comfortably report tonight go to Joe Biden, who little more than, 72 hours ago was given up for politically dead. That was then. This is now. Whatever he was able to cobble together, even in states that had early voting that came before his stunning performance in South Carolina, well, none of that materialized to be a big worry for him. We're going to be digesting all of these numbers. Besides Alabama just closing right now, the states of Maine and Massachusetts and Oklahoma have also closed. Tennessee, which was to close at this hour because of the hurricane, and a lot of folks having very big difficulty getting to the polls right now, they will, in fact, be allowed to continue looking for places to vote until at least 9 p.m. Eastern time, in some parts of the state up to 11 p.m. So we're going to be digesting all of this and the battle in this very big night with Lou Dobbs. We've got the former Democratic Tennessee Congressman Harold Ford Jr., Trish Regan, and Maria Bartiromo. Maria, begin with you. I mean, a lot at stake here. Bernie Sanders had the momentum, then all of a sudden you had these capitulations and candidates quitting the race, and making things as accommodative as they could for Joe Biden. Early on, it seems to have worked.
Yeah, it did work, and we were expecting a pretty good showing here, but you're still not hearing any policy proposals from Joe Biden or anybody on that stage in terms of the economy. Let's be serious here and look at the obvious elephant in the room. Things have changed materially for the economic outlook because of coronavirus. Today, we had a 0.5 point cut in the Federal Reserve funds rate. That was not expected, a surprise move.
And
market still went down 800 points. So lower interest rates cannot cure coronavirus. This right now is going to be the president's biggest test so far. His leadership is going to be what dictates what happens in November. And so far, you're not hearing any policy proposals, any acknowledgement in terms of the coronavirus and what is going to happen in terms of the economy. You're going to see shortages, and we already are, in parts and components. That's going to mean companies cannot sell their products because they can't make their products. It's all made in China. And as a result, zero earnings growth for the rest of the year. That's a big issue.
You know, you could flip it around for the Democratic candidates vying for their nomination, that they might like that. They might like a scenario where the economy sort of freezes up, Harold.
No, I don't think any Democrats rooting for that. I would agree with everything that Maria said about the challenges the economy will face.
For a lot of them, that's about the only chance they have to have a hiccup in this economy.
Well, so I'll take a step back for one moment. A Bernie Sanders nomination makes it a lot harder, I think, for Democrats. I've been a believer in that for a while. I think when you pit socialism versus capitalism, which both of these hosts have done very well on both of their shows over the months, and I would agree with them. An emergence of Joe Biden changes the conversation in many ways, and obviously an exigency like the coronavirus, which none of us wished on the economy. No one wishes the kind of health illnesses and challenges families will face.
But it's changed the game a little bit, right?
It has, and I think the president, up to this point, this is not the subject of this conversation, but there's some questions are begged about how well he's managing this and leading through this. I heard a conversation on early with Liz Claman, a guest she had, explaining how his son flew back into JFK, and there was no testing, there were no directions given him about how he should conduct himself, and he had spent time in Florence, and obviously we know what's happening in Italy. So I do think that these questions around leadership on this issue will be very important. But if you're a Democrat tonight and you wanted to see Bernie Sanders have a tough time, you're having a good night tonight, whether you're for Mike Bloomberg or Joe Biden. Joe Biden obviously is doing very well this evening.
And we can get interest to the whole, coronavirus and how it sort of affects the race going forward. Were you amazed and are you surprised at the degree to which the party sort of rallied around Joe Biden?
Sure. No, but they have to, right? Because getting back to what you're saying, Harold, if it's a question of capitalism versus socialism, that's a really tough that's a tough race for them. You're going to have a lot of people that are longtime Democrats that are not going to be able to vote for a socialist. So they'll be completely demoralized. And that's a scenario where quite easily, I think, Donald Trump takes it. So now you're in a situation where if Biden is the guy, he's going to appeal to a lot of those middle-of-the-road candidates. And, that's going to be a much harder proposition for Donald Trump. Nonetheless, it is going to come back to the economy. I don't think you can blame him for a virus that came from China. I think the handling has been pretty decent thus far. I think there's a lot of hysteria out there. I don't know about where you guys live, but where I live, you can't buy hand sanitizer anywhere because
and our kids are forced to elbow bump.
And there's a shortage on pasta and canned goods. So
whoa, pasta. Okay. All right, I don't want to leave Lou Dobbs out of this, Lou. I'm very sorry. Lou, the other thing I wanted to look at was Michael Bloomberg. Now he has spent, depending on what figures, $500 million to $750 million. And so far not a single delegate for that effort, and so far in some of these early states not faring well. What happens to him?
Well, I think what happens to him is something that he's sort of projected here in the last 24 hours, in which he said that he disagrees with some of the president's policies, but not all. And in point of fact, his principal problem with the president is the way in which he has carried out his policies, which makes it style points, and you spend $750 million to contest a style point by a leader. I think that's sort of where the Democratic Party is. They have nothing to say here. The economy is right now booming. The markets have lost, again today, something approaching $900 billion, but that we're still up $35 billion. 401ks are still remarkably higher than they were when the president was elected. The economy is still growing. And in fact, he is the guy who in 2017 was doing evaluations of supply chains in Southeast Asia and China, because he was aware of the dependency of corporate America and indeed the United States from a national security point. This president has been ahead of the curve across the board. You're not going to hear a lot of people saying over the next several months that, oh my gosh, we shouldn't have tariffs. We shouldn't have balanced trade with China. In fact, they're going to be delighted that we have domestic capability and capacity, because we're going to be, for a very considerable period of time, in my judgment, unable to avail ourselves of labor arbitrage in China and cheaper products from China.
All right, Lou, I want to go right now. Bernie Sanders was supposed to be the man of the evening before. Just think about it. Joe Biden's win in South Carolina was a very, very comfortable win. It was Bernie Sanders who was slated to do very, very well tonight. And he might still do very well. Remember, we've only got 4 states out of the 14 primaries that are up for grabs tonight, and the better than 1,350 delegates up there. But there had been a consensus building around the possibility of Bernie Sanders capturing as many as 700 of those delegates tonight. That still might materialize, but again, it depends on how other candidates sort of fracture out here. I say fracture because you need 15% to get any delegates at all. And for some candidates, given the still crowded field, it is crowded in a lot of these states, they might be dividing a limited sum. Edward Lawrence, meanwhile, in Essex Junction, Vermont, Bernie Sanders' headquarters, he voted earlier today, and I guess he drove himself to the polls, right?
Exactly, he sure did, and tried to get that energy and excitement. That's what he told his supporters there at the polls. I can tell you this crowd of about 3,000 in this exposition center erupted when Vermont went to Senator Bernie Sanders. They're very excited about that, obviously his home state. When we saw Alabama and Virginia and North Carolina go for Biden, there were boos in the crowd here. Now, the campaign knew that it would be tough with minority voters shading towards former Vice President Joe Biden. But in Virginia, the campaign really thought they could do something. Senator Bernie Sanders spent a lot of time in Richmond and Virginia Beach to try and turn that around. That's a little disappointing for them here. However, they're saying the night is still young. They're waiting for those big states, Texas and California, hoping that Senator Bernie Sanders does well in both of those states there. Now, again, the early voting, obviously we're seeing it go to Joe Biden, but again, the mood here, waiting on those big numbers, the big states to come in, and they believe that they're going to do well in the back half of this night. Neil?
All right, thank you, Edward Lawrence. Maria, if you think about it, the third and fourth biggest, delegate prizes tonight are North Carolina and Virginia. 110 delegates and 99 delegates, respectively. Joe Biden won both states handily.
Yeah, he's having a good night for sure. And I think what you said earlier in terms of the Democrats and the overall party's having a good night because Bernie Sanders is actually being outshined by Joe Biden. But it's a long race, and I don't know if this is actually going to tell us anything about the national come November.
Yeah, I think, Trish, when you look at the numbers, too, especially if they're divided this way, a lot of people are saying, well, what will Bloomberg do, especially if he doesn't catch any, even a minimum 15%? He could go delegate less of the night.
He should get out. I mean, I think if he doesn't have a good showing tonight, the handwriting's on the wall, so to speak. It has been on the wall. I mean, the guy has spent an absolute fortune in terms of his ad campaign. I mean, every time I go on my phone and I click on something on FoxBusiness.com or Politico or any New York Times,
just
boom, a Bloomberg
Times
thing
Square,
comes up. Yeah, I mean, so he spent all this money, and it's not paying off because it hasn't translated in terms of his personality with the voters or in the debates on stage. So he's got a very tough road ahead of him. And if I'm the Democrats, I'm saying to myself, get him off the stage, get him out of there, have him put his money and his might behind a candidate that can win.
But I also just want to add the policy, because when you hear what Michael Bloomberg has said about China, I mean, President Trump changed the conversation on China. Peter Navarro, being a hawk out there, was right in terms of the supply shortages that we're seeing now, the part shortages, and the bad behavior of China. Michael Bloomberg was asked in that interview a couple of months ago, what about China? And he said, oh, he's not a dictator. It's fine. We're going to do to them what they do to us. Well, actually, you needed to be really tough on China. And the president has actually educated a lot of people in terms of the bad behavior of China. This is where this started, the coronavirus. This is the upset in the economy, which was going incredibly well here. So I think it's worth looking at Michael Bloomberg's policy comments.
And Joe Biden has those problems too. You're absolutely right.
By the way, Joe Biden is still the same candidate he was a couple of weeks ago. So that still be a problem. That was why maybe Michael Bloomberg stays in the race, because, a few wins does not a very different candidate make.
So Bloomberg has helped reset the conversation in the race. To the extent that we're not talking about capitalism and socialism, if you're a Democrat and you're worried about winning in the fall, this is a positive exchange we're having. I don't disagree that Joe Biden or Mike Bloomberg, if they become the nominee of the Democratic Party, they're going to have to answer very serious and obvious questions about success that President Trump's had in China.
But both men have big weaknesses, right? You mentioned Biden.
But they're not socialists. So
fine, but you mentioned Biden where they have doubts about his ability as a campaigner, and you mentioned Bloomberg, they have doubts about his sincerity as a Democrat. So they both have big doubts, Democrats.
Right, so President Trump, when he ran, there were questions about whether or not he was a sincere Republican, and he's proven to be, over a period of time, just that. My only point is Democrats had to cross a hurdle. One of the reasons you didn't want the Sanders, again, this is early, to Ms. Bartiromo's point, we're early in the evening. He could still do well in both California and Texas.
Absolutely.
This evening. But the fact that we're now moving away as a Democrat from debating whether we are defending socialism versus promoting capitalism, perhaps thinking about a way to reimagine and reconstitute it to ensure that it works equally for everyone, that's a conversation Democrats have a fighting and fair chance on in the 5 or 6 key battleground states. We were not going to win, and we're not going to win with a socialist message going into Michigan.
Let me bring Lou Dobbs on that point.
That's my only point.
I'm sorry. Lou, one of the things that you do notice with Democrats now, and to Harold's point about how they're trying to rally around or clear the field, in this case for Joe Biden, that appears to be the case, they're doing that a lot sooner than Republicans did 4 years ago for Donald Trump. Very different circumstances, I grant you. But this isn't a sign that they desperately want to win, and they're betting on Biden as the best chance to do it. Many candidates swallowing their pride and what were pretty well-financed campaigns to make it happen.
Absolutely, and I think this is a great lesson for Republicans to coalesce this early and do so, obviously, and they've done it within a period of about 72 hours to move toward Biden as the party's candidate. It's clear even to Bloomberg, who remained hopeful. It's also clear to Sanders, who is now furious with the Democratic establishment because he feels what is happening to him right now is much the same as he felt 4 years ago when they conspired and effectively removed his chances altogether from the nomination, bought by the Democratic the campaign of Hillary Clinton through the DNC. But this time, they have moved in an orderly fashion to coalesce behind the candidate, and it is clearly Biden. And by the way, Biden tonight is delivering. That's because the establishment is supporting him, I think, in nearly every one of these state races.
The big worry with Bernie Sanders has and continues to be this notion that he would be a down-ticket disaster. I think that was one of the things we got into last week, Carol. Do you hear people say the same thing, that even if he has a chance, the rest of the down-ticket candidates for Congress, they're not going to go anywhere?
Oh, yeah, and that is the reason that the administration is pumping up the idea that we got to take the House back, we got to keep the Senate.
Right.
I mean, these down tickets are so important in terms of the president's ability to get anything done or the Democrats' ability to take back power. I mean, so, yeah, I think people are very afraid of the down ticket if Bernie Sanders is in the lead because what happens then? What happens to the Senate? What happens to the House? And if it does go Democrat, well, if you think the economy is going to worsen now, wait until after the election because things are going down in a big way.
Let's look at Massachusetts. And it is an interesting one because, of course, this is Elizabeth Warren's home state. But the liberal vote seems to be split between them. And running up the middle is Joe Biden in that environment, likely winning the state of Massachusetts. We're not calling that state at this point. But this is one of these phenomena we had mentioned earlier. And Harold Ford Jr., you're looking at this. It feeds that argument. They stay together. Moderates might welcome that, I guess, because it divides the progressive vote, the extreme progressive.
I think the biggest newspaper in Boston endorsed Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, in the last few days. The last, I think, rally held by Senator Sanders before the most recent primary was in Massachusetts. If Joe Biden, to your point, if he's consolidated this kind of support and can win in Massachusetts, obviously a state that has a strong Democratic profile, but if the home senator and the senator who state abuts that has a senator from Delaware who comes and wins, who 78 hours ago his campaign was counted out, it just further demonstrates or validates the point being made here. And I would also point out in Vermont, Bernie Sanders, the last number you put up, he has 52% of the vote amongst Democrats in his home state. Now, if you're in your home state, in your own party, and you're only winning 52% of the vote running for president, that's a statement as well. So it's early. We'll get these numbers. These numbers will still continue to come, obviously.
Lou Dobbs, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, Massachusetts is really a delegate treasure trove. 91 delegates there. If it is proportional voting, Joe Biden gets the most from that state, gets the most from Virginia, 99 delegates, gets the most from North Carolina, 110 delegates. You could make an argument that it's Biden who comes off the evening the net delegate winner, and I'm wondering how that changes the whole battleground issue for next week.
I think it changes it dramatically. I think you're exactly right, because going into the Super Tuesday dialogue across all of the Sunday talk shows, across all of the WAGs and savants over the past 2 weeks, this was going to be Sanders' great embarrassment for the Democratic establishment and create the great dilemma for Democrats, which was, what do you do with a socialist Democrat who has a great affection for communists like Fidel Castro and President Xi? It doesn't look like that's going to be the problem at all. In fact, it looks like Biden is the solution that former President Obama has selected, the Democratic establishment has selected, and they're carrying it off. It appears right now, and again, as everyone has acknowledged, it's early, but it looks like they're about to carry off a consolidation that is going to be very important to the Democratic establishment. It's going to be greatly frustrating to Sanders and his supporters, it appears, but it looks like it is Biden's evening at this hour.
All right. Thank you very, very much. We're going to take a quick break here, pay our bills, and then see where things go from here. It is interesting to point out, we mentioned next week, because there's no rest for the weary, you have 3 to 52 delegates at stake in states like Michigan, Missouri, Washington State, a lot of others here that are friendly to Joe Biden, who's putting in a good night. 3 of the 4 contests he has won. It is looking like Massachusetts might very well be his 4th. And the night is still early. Stay with us. A lot of delegates at stake tonight, 1,357 of them, fully 2/3 of what you need to be on the way to getting the Democratic nomination. 1,991 is the ultimate number there. But because they have proportional voting, you need a minimum of 50% of the popular vote to get a share of the delegate vote. The thinking had been, before so many candidates started dropping out, that that would be divided among a very big bunch. They would have a very tough time amassing the 15% as the lesser candidates, and it would actually pave the way, actually help Bernie Sanders amass those delegates sooner rather than later. That is somewhat in doubt tonight, because it does seem like a good many are seeing right now a very big edge going there. We're following that very, very closely. Also, Michael Bloomberg's campaign, his national spokesperson, Aaron McGregor, is with us. Is that Judge Judy?
Yes, that is.
Okay, I thought that was.
Judge Judy, yeah.
All right, now I know. Aaron, very good to have you.
Good to be here.
For your candidate, do we know his strategy tonight? Later on, he was expecting to do good, I think, in states like California and all of that. He is getting some proportional voting, some 15% showings in some states, but not off to the strongest of starts. Are you worried?
Well, he is at 15% or above so far, and it's just so early already tonight. The one thing I would point out to you, Neil, is that winning a state doesn't matter. And so people are talking about Joe Biden winning North Carolina and Virginia and others, but you still have to amass delegates. And the reality is,
you come off better when you win, right? I mean, winning gives you more delegates.
I don't disagree with that, but this still is a race for amassing delegates, and it could still very well be that Joe Biden cannot get to the majority of delegates that you need by the end of the race. And that's why we have to wait until every vote is counted tonight. And we may not know that for a couple of weeks, because it could take a couple of weeks for those California results to come in. So everybody needs to just hang on tight and watch all the votes be counted tonight. So you're in that camp that says,
people could have mailed in ballots as late as today. We wouldn't know those results. So there could be tens of thousands of them for a number of days. I mean, if you're at that point where you have to wait that long to, conclude how California's going, you might have bigger issues. But do you think that Michael Bloomberg at this stage, and if it looks like he entered the race as an alternative Bernie Sanders, and the concern about Joe Biden not looking like he was going anywhere, now that it looks like Joe Biden at least is going somewhere, isn't the whole rationale for the Bloomberg candidacy gone?
I don't think that it is at all just yet, and here is why. Mike Bloomberg, number one goal, he wants to make sure that Donald Trump is not reelected. But number two, I think it's very clear that he knows that Bernie Sanders should not be the Democratic nominee to go up against Donald Trump. And there is no guarantee right now that that will be the case. We have to wait and see what this delegate math looks like. And that's what I would caution everybody on. We still have to see what happens in California. It's really important to see those results before anybody jumps to any kind of conclusion.
All right, I want to spread this out to our panelists, but he must be disappointed that even with the support of Judge Judy, he's not gotten more judge support.
When everybody said New York City was
very bad joke on my part, so I'll leave it. Maria.
That is good.
Maria, what do you think?
Well, look, this is what I have to say. I mean, hearing Aaron talk about, Michael Bloomberg's number one goal is to make sure Donald Trump is not elected again. I'm sorry, it's not a good look. I mean, what does this mean for the people of America? What does this mean in terms of changing their lives? You can't have that be your only policy, that you just want to replace Donald Trump and take Donald Trump down. People are smarter than that, and they want to say to themselves, well, wait, Where am I today versus 4 years ago? Well, the unemployment rate is at a 50-year low. I'm feeling better. I've got more money in my pocket. Wages are up, particularly in the bottom end of earners. Income inequality is narrowing. And I'd like to hear that somebody has more in mind for my life, my family's life, than just taking out Donald Trump. So I don't think that policy goal takes you to November into the election and gives you a win. I think you need much more than that to make people believe that you're actually going to have an effect on their lives.
The bigger issue, Trish, seems to be what Erin is saying, is that if we can make sure it's not Bernie Sanders, we have a better shot.
Well, it sounds like she wants a brokered convention. Again, not a good look.
That's the only way he can win.
Well,
right?
Not a good look. I mean, why do you want a brokered convention? It shows you how divided they are. It tells you that they're not willing.
It worked for Abraham Lincoln. I covered that. He did okay.
But listen, Mike Bloomberg is not taking votes away from Bernie Sanders. He's taking them away from Joe Biden.
Michael Bloomberg is going to speak to supporters right now. Don't know what this is about, but again, it's very, very early in the evening, as we've all been stressing here, and Judge Judy might have said so herself, that you can't close the deal on any of this. Harold Ford Jr., what do you think we're going to hear?
I think a combination of what we heard so far. He's helped change the conversation in the race. He will take credit for ensuring that Democrats will have a viable candidate, one that can be positioned.
State. And that one has 219 delegates at stake. That's a big one. And he is invested, we're told, in that state more than any other. Harold Ford Jr., he's obviously still in the race, has no reason to quit. What do you think?
He's reset the conversation in the race. The more, again, not to be repetitive, but the more Democrats are not defending socialism, but promoting their brand of capitalism and how they will make America stronger and wealthier for all Americans is a good thing. He embodies that. He personifies that. He would be, I think, very wrong from a personal standpoint and would be hurtful to the party overall if he gets out anytime soon. Joe Biden looks like he's going to have a good night, and he owes a lot of credit to Mike Bloomberg. But here we are on March 3rd. I get these days confused now because I have a 6-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. We're on March 3rd.
I don't even know what I had for lunch today.
We were on a little over 72 hours ago, and it was unclear if Joe Biden would have oxygen in this race. He does tonight, but this is early. So this is a good night for those of us in the party who want a fair fight in November. Capitalism versus capitalism.
I know you think he's raising the bar, but one of my complaints, and this echoes something that Maria said as well, is the lack of policy that's been put forward. I'll tell you, by this time, think about it. 4 years ago, we knew what people's tax policies were. They were quite detailed. I remember going through every single
candidate. They're detailed. They're just going to tax a lot.
I do not think that we have gotten enough in the way of tax policy, in terms of how they're going to create jobs. I mean, they still think, and I hate to break it to you all, but they still think that President Obama is the reason why we have a successful economy right now. So, we need a lot more in the way of actual details in terms of what they're going to do. Donald Trump did that and changed the conversation significantly because he was willing to talk about
Barack Obama wasn't a slouch. I mean, we had some growth in his years, right?
I'm comparing and contrasting what we saw from the Republicans back then versus what we're seeing from Democrats.
I don't mean to jump into Trish. Let's look at Maine and Massachusetts. These are interesting developments of themselves. Now, Harold Ford Jr. was talking about what's going on with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and that, conundrum, if you will, where these two cancel each other out, maybe paving the way for, a Joe Biden to do well in Massachusetts, maybe win Massachusetts. It is similarly playing out, and I'd say to a lesser degree, right now in the state of Maine. Now, in Maine, of course, we're talking about 24 delegates here, but it is continuing a New England theme that you would think would favor Bernie Sanders, or at the very least Elizabeth Warren, but because invariably they seem to divide the same vote. I'm not saying universally. It's something that goes, Harold Ford Jr., to Biden's advantage.
And then do the math for one moment there at Maine. If you add Biden and Bloomberg, and just say Bloomberg got out, some people are saying, and Sanders and Warren, the Biden-Bloomberg lane still wins there. So these numbers are surprising to me. I thought the Northeast numbers, these New England numbers, and I'm a Southerner, but these New England numbers I thought would come out a little differently here. This suggests strongly, again, that Bloomberg is right to be in this race, and it could very well be that Biden is the nominee or Bloomberg, but the reality is that that lane is finding some traction.
Right.
too
But
bad.
I should
Okay.
stress that we are not, called based on less than 1 or 2% of the vote any winner. Although remarkably, we can do this with these models. Like 3 people go into a room and vote. We can say we can estimate that the winner will be, but we're not saying that now. But it's just a phenomenon that you will see keep popping up again and again here.
And there are deals being made. I mean, we know that there was probably a deal being made with Joe Biden by Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, to step down right before Super Tuesday. And in terms of Elizabeth Warren, you have to question, what is she doing? I think she's vying for the vice president spot. She would like to be partner with Bernie Sanders. So that's what she's doing right now. Bloomberg, look, he's still talking right now.
In other words, no one's telling her to get out.
No one's telling her to get out because she's the same lane as Bernie Sanders, and she wants to be his vice presidential candidate. I think it's clear to her at this point that she's not going to be president, and she's not going to be the nominee. Michael Bloomberg, there's policy and then there's personality. It's good to see that he got a little personality finally in this, trying to make some jokes and all that. I don't know how sustainable that is, but there's policy. We don't really know his policies. I know he wants to raise taxes on Wall Street and the top 1%. I know he's against guns, and I know that he's big on the environment. But beyond that, I don't really know what his policies are. And then there's personality, which goes a long way. Witness Donald Trump. And
You're right about that. More weight than we know. By the way, let's take a quick peek. As we told you, the differentiator for Fox Business's coverage is we are simultaneously looking at markets and how they're doing across the globe and our own futures market right now. Now, whether you want to extrapolate from this that the markets are jumping on the prospect that Bernie Sanders could be fading, that's a leap I won't take, but I just said it, didn't I? But anyway, that's something we're looking at here. We're going to be looking at Asian markets. Our own markets tumbled today with the growing concerns about the coronavirus. This could be different than that, and could be signs the CDC putting out a late report that while a pandemic might be inevitable, it doesn't mean it's a bad pandemic. I think that was the gist of their statement, which confused the heck out of me. But again, this is where we stand right now in this race. On the phone with us right now is the former New York Stock Exchange chairman and CEO, Dick Grasso. And Dick, very early in the contest right now, but there does seem to be something to the fact that when people, fade out of a race and support Joe Biden in this case, it's a sign Democrats very, very much want to avoid any cacophony or confusion or anything indicating a split or a bad arguing back and forth, and unite the party maybe a little bit earlier than thought. Would that pose a threat to the president if they're getting their eggs in order now?
Well, first, great to be with you, Neil. And I think Harold got it right. What he would like to see and what, moderate Democrats would like to see is a debate in November between their brand of capitalism and Donald Trump's brand of capitalism. I think tonight is a great night for Bloomberg thus far, a great night for Bloomberg and for former Vice President Biden, because it's clear if this continues that none of the candidates are going to get the 1,991 votes that are necessary in the first round of the convention, which means Michael's strategy has worked beautifully. It will go to a brokered convention, and
who's to say he's the instant beneficiary of that?
Well, I don't think he necessarily is the beneficiary, but it certainly takes the wind out of Senator Sanders' sails and takes away from the Democrats the debate in November becoming one of socialism versus capitalism. America will never be a socialist country. Even Denmark, which the senator likes to point to as an example of socialism working, the Danish leadership have said flat out, we are not socialists. We are capitalists who have sincere concern for those who are lacking. All right, this is not a country that will ever accept Bernie Sanders' brand of socialism.
You're taking more people when the Danes respond and get furious about it. But Maria,
well, you're right. I think Dick is spot on this. I mean, the Democrats do not want to have to defend socialism and Bernie Sanders. And I think if it does go to a point where Bernie Sanders is in the lead and, poised to become the nominee, I think you get a brokered convention. And let's not write off and underestimate what Hillary Clinton might do. And let's not underestimate what President Obama might do do and say, you know what, we got to get Michelle in there. I mean, all bets are off if, in fact, Bernie Sanders comes to the table and is the nominee. The Democrats do not want to go up against Donald Trump with Bernie Sanders and defending socialism.
And,
no way.
And don't get me started on the Danes. But anyway, but
they seem like such a nice people.
They're really not, actually.
Okay, really.
At least not on Twitter. But we won't go there right now.
Harold and I have had this discussion many times. Hillary is not out. You go to a brokerage convention, Hillary is going to jump in.
She's going to ride in a white horse. I agree with you, Jack.
But that's not
I bet
fly.
she's hoping that.
But that's not going to fly. Do you think of how dumb that was? I mean,
I agree.
From a political perspective, though. I mean, and we'll go to Harold as a Democrat. I mean, it would be a disaster for your party to bring Hillary back.
Again, the fact that we're not having a conversation tonight about socialism versus capitalism is a big win for Democrats.
You're
now,
focused like a laser.
Mr. Grasso is my friend, someone I admire a great deal, and someone that New York and the country owes a great debt to for his leadership. We are at a moment tonight for Democrats, which Democrats who want to see a reasonable, robust, serious debate. Look, Bernie Sanders has diagnosed the challenge and the problems of income inequality, I think, in a very meaningful and serious way. And my challenge with him is that his answers are not serious at all. Tonight, voters in 14 states, almost 1,315 delegates, have had a say this evening. It is early, but the preliminary numbers, the preliminary indicators suggest that there are members in the Democratic Party who care about the issues he's outlining, who say, you know what? Those are not the answers or the paths that we want to pursue. That's the big win tonight, at least as we sit here at 8:40, 8:45. We have a ways to go. If we get to the convention, I would agree with the analysis. I think Secretary Clinton, if given the chance to be the only person who can stop Bernie Sanders, she would probably leap at the opportunity. But we're only at March 3rd, and we got an entire month to go to kind of figure, an entire spring and summer to go to get to some of these answers.
But you also have to think about all of those supporters in the Bernie Sanders camp right now. How disenfranchised did they feel? Do they become? I mean, they're a significant portion right now.
Right, but we live in a democratic society. They have to accept number. I mean, he said something earlier that if he had 1,800 delegates going in, that we should give it to him. Look, let's get there.
All right.
Those conversations we will have if we reach there.
I think you have to remember sort of what's happening right now, and that is income inequality is narrowing. I mean, when you look at wages, the bottom earners are seeing bigger wage increases on the bottom than the top. So this whole idea that Trump's policies are just for the 1%, it's just political talk. It's just not true.
But I got to tell you, those at the bottom would switch with the ones at the top in a heartbeat.
All right, we can
Yes.
have these political arguments, guys. I do want to mention here, I know there's a consensus that builds around brokered conventions. 7 presidents have come from brokered conventions. Just a reminder. We'll have more after this. You know, really, we're just getting started. Polls recently closing about 15 minutes ago in Arkansas, in another 15 minutes in Texas. 228 delegates, the second biggest prize of the night behind California, Minnesota, and Colorado. Anyway, this has been an opportunity for Jackie DeAngelis to sort of monitor what's on voters' minds as they cross the country right now and take a look at these 14 states up for grabs. Some interesting reads on what we're thinking, I guess. Huh, Jackie?
There definitely are. Good evening to you, Neil. Of those 57 delegates that are at stake, 91 of them in Massachusetts. So let's take a look at what voters were thinking as they were heading into the polls there. Of these voters, many of them were late deciders, and the majority of those late deciders, about 43%, they were favoring Joe Biden. You can see that Warren was a close second. Massachusetts is her home state. It's Sanders' backyard, and so he's running third. But interesting to see what folks were thinking in that state. Now, health care in Massachusetts was the top issue for a lot of these voters. 35% said we are worried about health care, and you can see that Sanders is leading there. 30% of those voters were favoring him as they were heading in, 27% to Biden. Let's switch and take a look at Texas, because the most delegates at stake behind California tonight. Texas has 228. Late deciders there were the 27%, and of these, 39%, almost 40%, were favoring Joe Biden. Sanders was expected to do a little better here, but Bloomberg was the second there with about 20%. Finally, let's take a look at Minnesota because this was Amy Klobuchar's home state. 75 delegates at stake there. 49% of them were late deciders favoring Biden as well. So that gives you a sense of what the zeitgeist was going into the evening, Neil.
I like that. The zeitgeist. In North Carolina, kind of interesting here as we pick apart the other races. Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, who was not that far from being pushed right out of office, handling some racial charges, and old yearbook photos and the rest. He won his party's primary, and he's going to face Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest in the November general election. You know the state very well, Harold. I mean, and around, people who come back, and Tennessee, it is not, and all, but it is an interesting reminder that we can sometimes prematurely dig the graves of politicians,
No doubt about it. You look, I was fascinated, the late deciders in these races, that we can't underestimate or overstate the role that it looks like this consolidation may have played for Democrats. In Minnesota, almost 50% of the people siding with Biden, with Klobuchar off the ticket, being late deciders, it just says a lot. Two, I think voters don't put people in the penalty box for the rest of their lives.
No.
And people make decisions and they judge people on their lives. You look at Biden, what he's faced in this campaign, all of the incoming, even some of the incoming Bloomberg is faced. And you can even look, the president's a great example of this as well. So
probably the best example.
Right, he very well might be. So tonight, again, it's early, but I got to tell you, I'm adding up the numbers of Biden and Bloomberg. And again, if you want that lane to be open and viable for a Democrat, a moderate Democrat or a more practical or capitalist-focused Democrat, this is a good night for that group of people.
All right, well said. By the way,
I'm one of them.
we keep, you are indeed. We keep showing you Massachusetts race because it's so tight right now with about 5% of the vote in. It always alternates between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden. He seems to be the beneficiary when those two are tight, and then along comes Biden to sort of pick up the slack. But it's still early on in the evening. No one is calling that race thus far, but it's an interesting sort of microcosm of the type of evening we're having. Guess who's here? Liz Claman of the Claman Countdown. She joins our august panel, and she's really excited about it. And who wouldn't be? Liz, good to have you, my friend. It's interesting. We were chatting about this idea that never, ever write an obituary for a candidate because it never pans out as planned.
No, you could get American Samoa delegates.
That's right. And there are 6 of them.
There are 6, and they matter. But this is the electoral debut of Mike Bloomberg. And people were saying, oh, forget it, there's no way. But you got to watch. And what Harold just mentioned was there may be a lane, there may be an opportunity for him here, except that when you look at what Joe Biden was able to accomplish in South Carolina, which was definitely to say that's Biden country.
Yeah.
You know that Bernie Sanders has Vermont country, and you know that Liz Warren is at least fighting for Massachusetts.
I would imagine it's a big embarrassment if she fails to win Massachusetts.
Very. When you don't win your own state, that can be a problem, and that started to be a worry for Amy Klobuchar. But California, as we're looking at the clock and we are waiting, that's 415 delegates, a very delegate-rich state. Don't assume that, say, for example, a Bernie Sanders, you're talking about assumptions and putting people in their graves before it actually happens. Don't assume that he's got the Latinx vote. Bernie Sanders is very popular with the Latin and certainly the Hispanic vote over there, except that you've got to take into account that the Central Valley of California and Southern California, heavily Hispanic, but you've got the vaqueros there. Those are they're the known cowboys. They have their own businesses. They are very capitalistic, and it's not necessarily something that they warm up to when they hear the word socialism. So watch out for California.
Who's the last? I know you're from California, Beverly Hills. Ronald Reagan's the last Republican who won California, right?
Well, he won California, and that was, of course, way back when.
Yeah.
California's a blue state.
You don't remember, but I do.
Yeah.
I was already old then.
Thank you, Neil.
I was already old then.
I do remember one thing, that it was a huge deal at the time. But watch out also for Colorado. Colorado's a purple state that's moment by moment turning a little more blue as we go here. So it's California, Colorado, Texas, of course.
You're right.
Be very interesting to see
Colorado
what
at 9 p.m., about 9 minutes from now, one of the 3 states, including Texas, Minnesota. Trish, early in the evening, though it might be, you were mentioning, I think you were mentioning, or certainly Harold was, this idea of, 15% is what you need to get a share of the delegates. Right. And if Bloomberg can pop over that level in a lot of key states, and right now it's showing that he has, you get more and more delegates acquired. It doesn't put you in the lead, but it does give you some representation going into the convention if you stick it out through the convention, right?
Sure, and then we could be looking at a brokered convention scenario. And I say it's not good for the party, because I think that you wind up in a situation where you have a lot of disenfranchised people, where people feel like, wait a second, I was all in for Sanders, and now the establishment took it from him and thus took it from me, and that's the risk that they run.
But that's a misnomer about the last campaign. I know that sort of urban legend that somehow Hillary stole that from Bernie Sanders, but her delegate haul was pretty proportionate to her popular vote haul, and then so this idea that they're going to steal it again from him. I don't know, Harold. And you didn't say. I'm just saying that
if you have a brokered convention, that's exactly.
Well, that's the fear. But you extended that definition of a brokered convention to include any infighting that doesn't result in multiple votes, and that is damaging to the party.
In fairness to Tricia's point and to Sanders' point, they thought it was wrong. Sanders did that the superdelegates declared early on their support. This next convention, the superdelegates cannot weigh into the second ballot. And the superdelegates siding with him did distort the numbers a bit, in fairness to him. I was a Clinton supporter. But you look at 92, Jerry Brown fought Bill Clinton up to the very end.
That's
Bill
right.
Clinton, he went on to win, obviously. 80, Kennedy fought Carter right up to the very end. Carter obviously was not as successful. Reagan fought Ford right up to the end. Ford ended up not being successful. So I don't think it. I mean,
so when it's nasty, it's generally hard for the party.
Buchanan fought H.W. lesser so, but he fought him, and H.W. didn't fare as well in real life. So this is. The idea of a contested convention, not broker, but they've been contested. And this would be a true broker one if you don't get to 1991.
Right, and that's where you run the risk that you have some people that are super fed up. I was talking to one Democratic strategist recently who was concerned about, hey, you could have riots. I mean, it's uncharted territory, certainly in modern times, and there's going to be a group of people, the Bernie bros, which I call the Bernie thugs, that are going to be really angry. Really, really angry, and will that materialize in a negative way for the party?
But
and
anger
for the country,
dissipates outside of Italian families. It does dissipate. So you hope that is the case. Frank Luntz joins us right now, pollster extraordinaire. If you buy the argument here that it's going to be nasty no matter how you slice it, Frank, when all is said and done, whether it's Bernie Sanders, people angry at the party, or the party angry at Bernie Sanders. Parties invariably will do everything in their power to avoid that. What's your prognosis here?
They healed themselves, and the people who don't like Donald Trump are going to vote Democratic no matter who the nominee is. The people who don't like Bernie Sanders, let's say he gets the nomination, they're going to vote for Trump. To me, the big story tonight is that Democrats do not like billionaires. Neil, I've said that again and again. Tom Steyer goes through the entire campaign, spends many, many millions of dollars and gets nothing. Mike Bloomberg, I don't think he's going to have a good night tonight. I think he's going to finish below the threshold in a number of states, is at least my prognosis. And after spending hundreds of millions of dollars, more ads in some states than all the other candidates combined, and he's barely at 15%. They simply don't like wealthy people. And you hear it in Bernie Sanders' statements. You hear it in his debate performance. Second is that message matters. Joe Biden had an outstanding debate in last week, and that brought him back. And people who were deciding that they didn't want to vote for Sanders, they were choosing between Bloomberg and Biden. Tonight, I believe they will choose Biden. I think they will. I think Biden's going to have a great night tonight. I still think in the end, Bernie Sanders wins a few more delegates, but it's going to be a two-person race by tomorrow.
You know, Liz, this notion that they don't like rich people. JFK and FDR were pretty rich Democrats.
I love Frank, but Frank, I gotta disagree with you on that. Let's take it to Southern California. There may not be a lot of there are certainly quite a few multimillionaires there, and I've been talking to a bunch of them, and I've been talking to regular folks on the phone all week. They're very concerned about the early voting. You know, California is now very much vote by mail state because it's
40% have already voted.
Yeah,
right?
indeed. And a lot of them, it was open starting
before
February
today,
3rd.
I'm saying. Right.
Indeed, it was open February 3rd. You know, the slate does not resemble what it did February 3rd. I know people who voted for Pete Buttigieg, and they're really unhappy right now because they feel that that was now a dead vote, a wasted vote. Because had they known, they said they would have voted. So this may really change the effort here. But Californians like money. They definitely, and Democratic Californians do, and they don't hate success. They actually, many of them are very concerned about Bernie Sanders. And Frank, you know, Bernie Sanders has a huge contingent there, 105 staffers, 23 offices there in the field. I think he visited Coachella rather recently, which is around Palm Springs. But I'm not saying he doesn't have a foothold there.
I don't want to jump on either of you guys, but Oklahoma, we can now declare for Joe Biden with the 37 delegates there, I believe. That is his 4th state pickup of the night, Ralph. Am I reading that correctly? So of the 5 states, we could call only 1 so far for Bernie Sanders in Vermont, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee. I'm sorry, and Oklahoma now for Joe Biden. I'm sorry, Frank, you were saying.
I've been doing focus groups in California over the last 6 weeks, and they do not like Mike Bloomberg. And I'm telling you, he's going to do badly there. He's going to finish a distant third.
But not liking
Mike
Bloomberg is the same as not liking rich people, right?
I would just jump in.
And Bernie Sanders is going to win. I know this state. I've been talking to voters face to face, non-operatives. And this is the one thing that I try to bring to Fox is the perspective of the voters. And Bernie Sanders is very strong in this state. He has been very a populist message, very anti-business, Medicare for all, hostility towards millionaires and billionaires, as he likes to say. And he's going to have a good night in California.
Frank, isn't that because of his personality, his authenticity? I mean, I'm sorry, Mike Bloomberg, and I like the guy. I actually used to work for him at Bloomberg Television, but, you know, he does not translate. It just doesn't come through the screen. Bernie Sanders does. Donald Trump does. There's a commonality in the both of those people.
How much did Donald Trump lose in California? What percentage is Mike Bloomberg going to get in California? I'm going to show you person by person, evidence by evidence. This I know.
The Californians just hate wealthy people.
They do not.
California has become hostile, and California is going to vote for the Democratic nominee over the Republican. Let's save this piece of tape for the Christmas party.
Okay.
California will vote for the Democratic nominee over Donald Trump. Not even, it won't even be
no matter
close.
who that nominee is, right? Could be Bernie Sanders, could be Michael Bloomberg, could be Joe Biden. But
so if you were Donald Trump, you would just kind of write off California and say, I got to focus my efforts.
Almost every Republican has.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I would do that.
Look, I want to just jump onto this, though, because I think that the value of personality is important. California aside, right? Both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have an authenticity that America has responded to and that Americans really like. And so it's this weird crossover where sometimes you see these Bernie Sanders supporters that are totally switched
And I'm interrupting you rudely because our satellite just goes down with Frank Luntz. So I apologize for that.
Sorry, Frank.
But I do want to tell you right now, as we're looking at another state called, this time for Bernie Sanders, Colorado goes for Bernie Sanders right now. So this is his second state win. Edward Lawrence at Bernie Sanders' headquarters in Vermont right now. He won his home state, and now he picks up Colorado, increasingly a purple state. I don't know if they called blue outright, but a big win, obviously, for Senator Sanders. Edward Lawrence.
Yeah, Neil, this is a very excited crowd here. I don't know if you can hear them yelling, Bernie, Bernie. Every time they hear something positive going on, they chant his name, Bernie Sanders. Very excited, very energetic. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders, their campaign is really looking at those western states. You talk about California a lot. He spent a lot of time there. He spent over $1 billion on ads there. Joe Biden, the former vice president, spending about half that in the state. So the campaign here really sees this coming down to a two-person race between Senator Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And they do believe that they can get the edge tonight with those big states, Texas, California. Also, they're looking to do well in Massachusetts as well as Minnesota. They're trying to send a message here. You hear the crowd erupting when they get the news, when something positive. Again, the energy here is is still impeccable. There's a lot going on. They are not giving up hope. There are some boos when you hear that Biden has won certain states, but again, they're hopeful for the West Coast states as they come in. This campaign says they're about reform and change. They've stuck to that message. They say Senator Bernie Sanders is real. He connects with those voters and stays on message and has had the same philosophy for decades. Again, back to you.
All right, thank you very, very much. Again, by my count now, and correct me, Ralph, if I'm missing something, 6 states have now been reported, the 14 up for grabs tonight. Bernie Sanders has won his home state of Vermont and Colorado, a crucial state. Harold Ford Jr. was saying during the break. Joe Biden has picked up Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and Alabama. Right now, Connell McShane in Charlotte, North Carolina, with the latest from there. Connell.
Yeah, I think we're probably seeing similar patterns, Neil, across all of the states that the former vice president won. But it was a huge night for him here in North Carolina. We've been here the last few days kind of getting a sense of what people were talking about. And I'm struck by some of the storylines going in and how they actually played out on primary night. For example, going in here, we said, yeah, Vice President Biden had a terrific night in South Carolina, but would it have come a little bit late, too little too late, if you will, to build that momentum just a few days later onto Super Tuesday? And then we were looking at the early vote. Almost 800,000 people in this state voted early before Saturday, as a matter of fact, so they wouldn't have known the South Carolina result. So we said, well, maybe they'll break for somebody else, Bernie Sanders or Mike Bloomberg. On both of those questions, Biden comes out a big winner tonight. Now, the late deciders, I heard Jackie DeAngelis talking about this earlier across the country. That was a big story here in North Carolina. People who decided in the last few days, they really broke for Biden. I'll just tell you anecdotally, we were at a polling place not far outside the city of Charlotte earlier today, and it just so happened that was a place that didn't have a lot of early voting. People were voting day of, and even though at the time it was pouring rain, there was a steady flow of voters. A lot of them were Biden supporters and, had decided maybe in the last few days to come in Biden's direction. Another thing about that area, it happened to be a largely African-American neighborhood, and that's another area in which Biden really dominated here in North Carolina, as he did in South Carolina, as he did in Virginia. But that vote, that community voting for the former vice president has been a big story. But, it's been something else to watch this, Neil, having been in Iowa and having been in New Hampshire and having seen the former vice president campaign in both states, to see the transformation of this campaign and the results that have been put in South Carolina and then tonight in states like Virginia and like this one in North Carolina. He certainly had a very big night.
All right. Thank you, my friend, very, very much. And you wanted to take a peek at Tennessee. Now, that was supposed to see the polls close at 8 p.m. Eastern time because of the tornado there. They've kept things open a little bit later. It was 9 p.m. and in some locales, a part of the state, till 11 p.m. But something interesting going on there. Harold Ford Jr., of course, knows the state very, very well. What do you make of what you're seeing? Very early in the evening, about a third of the vote in right now. But right now it's been, toggling between Joe Biden and had been, but with Bernie Sanders. But look at Mike Bloomberg with 23% of the vote.
First of all, my prayers go out to family and friends who've been affected and battered by that horrible tornado that worked its way through the state. I think the numbers there are indicative and reflective of what you're seeing in other southern states. I think that Democrats in Tennessee, Arkansas, the SEC Democrats, as I call them, are certainly more practical and pragmatic minded, and frankly are delighted that they have a say in the Democratic primary. Normally when you reach this point, it's really a coronation at this point. I'm not surprised to see the numbers as they are. You find a lot of southern states, a lot of energized Democrats, so Sanders' numbers make sense. But again, that middle lane with adding up to Biden and the Bloomberg numbers are interesting. I don't count Bloomberg out in this state. I know a lot of friends, a lot of family and others who are very supportive of him.
Donald Trump won Tennessee last time,
hugely.
Right? Okay, so
but that's why I say Colorado and Minnesota. I'm interested in the governor's point on this coming from the Midwest. Those are the states you got to watch. If Sanders wins both of those states, if he's not the nominee, Democrats have to be very careful about how they talk about this going forward.
Do you think Tennessee could go again for the president?
Well, I think it's very likely Tennessee will. I mean, I don't want to count it out, but it's very likely we'll go.
I always think Tennessee, if Al Gore had won his state, Florida would have been immaterial.
If I was 6'8", I'd be playing for the Lakers. So I agree with you 100%. So the Colorado and Minnesota remain the great things to watch here. I'm delighted the great Charlie Gasparino's here.
All right, let me introduce these guys. Okay, the former Republican Wisconsin governor, presidential candidate Scott Walker. We've got the aforementioned Charlie Gasparino. And look who snuck in as well, Kristen Zoltis Anderson, all here. Governor, let me begin with you. And early read on the night is that Joe Biden, once given up for dead, seems to have resurrected himself.
You know, I think a lot of us, Democrat and Republican alike, thought South Carolina would be his last stand. If he did well there, which obviously he did, this would be a boost. I still think it's Bernie's to lose.
Really?
Well, you know, you look over history, Democrat and Republican alike, people who've run and done well before are typically the front runner. And I still think Bernie Sanders has got the base, particularly when we see the numbers coming in a few hours from California. But it's going to be close, and it's going to be a lot more competitive than people thought when they were writing the vice president's obituary.
Yeah, I can remember them writing you off in a certain recall election and a re-election.
Multiple
so you
times.
got to be very careful with that. But Charlie, what are you hearing?
I've been speaking with Biden people tonight, and here's what I would say. If it's close with Bernie and Biden in Texas, they're telling me it could be close, kind of close in California. And if Mike Bloomberg is the spoiler on this, there will be tremendous pressure from all of Harold's friends. Maybe not Harold himself. Tomorrow morning.
The spoiler for whom?
The spoiler preventing Biden from picking up. Listen, if you added Biden and Bloomberg in Texas as of the polls now, Biden wins, right? If you put those two moderate lanes together, he wins. And they're going to say, and it's going to be a lot of Harold's friends, I don't know about Harold, we'll ask him later, they're going to say, Mr. Bloomberg, please drop out. That will be the Democratic
Well, that's an
establishment.
interesting take on it.
I don't think he'll listen to him because he doesn't listen to anybody.
But he doesn't have to, right? Because if I'm Michael Bloomberg, I don't see a reason to drop out.
The other thing to remember is Elizabeth Warren is still in this race.
Right.
And by all accounts, when you take a look at polls and you ask who people's second choice is, a lot of Elizabeth Warren voters were either, their second choice was either Mayor Pete, who's no longer in the race, or Bernie Sanders. So there are other folks still in this race that are keeping some votes
But Kristen,
from Bernie
wouldn't
Sanders,
the
too.
Biden folks, who are those who want to push him, push for her to stay, that is Elizabeth Warren, in the race?
I think the Biden folks would greatly prefer her to stay in the race. I think
Right,
more of her
because
voters would go
she
Sanders than
siphoned
Biden.
some votes for...
Something to keep in mind from all the polling I've seen this election is that there are two things that consistently stand out. The Democrats, they want somebody who can beat Donald Trump, first and foremost.
Right.
And second, they're basically satisfied with their field. They may not like one candidate here or there, but that they liked their options. And what they've been waiting for with Joe Biden is a sign of life, a proof that he can win something.
Well,
and once he proved in South Carolina he could, suddenly a lot of Democratic voters who were sitting back and waiting said, okay, he can do it. He can do it. And that's why you're seeing him do so well with these late deciders.
Can I make one more point? I think Mike Bloomberg is going to be faced with being a possible pariah in his new party. He might have to go back to being a Republican if he stays in. I'm telling you, I can tell you the vitriol on the if you talk to establishment Democrats, and most of them are establishment, but the Bernie bros represent a minority. They want blood if this guy is denying Biden the nomination.
But most will still take his money.
They'll take anybody's money. Listen, politicians take it. Excuse me, I don't mean to criticize you and Harold, but have you ever turned down a contribution?
I resemble that a political contribution. But I think the fact that Bloomberg has been such a central part, not to be a one-note pony here, of switching the conversation. I'd be curious to hear Aaron's take on this from a polling standpoint, but making the conversation about Democrats' version of capitalism versus Republicans' version of capitalism, as opposed to capitalism versus socialism. That's the win in that. And Bloomberg has played a critical role. Well, he's helped. He personifies.
As much as I like, but I hear in Wisconsin and Minnesota and swing states, it's still about people concerned about socialism because of Bernie Sanders and his supporters. I think from a Republican standpoint, they don't walk away. They get upset about this. Who knows what they do? A lot of them sat on their hands in the 2016 election.
But
they can't afford to do it.
In general election, if they walk away and Biden picks up, suburban women, who cares?
But remember, to the governor's point, there were a lot of people who thought establishment Republicans would sit out the election last time, and apparently they didn't.
They didn't.
Right?
They didn't.
All right, let's bring Mike Emanuel into this. He's at a Democratic Watch Party in Austin, Texas. What's going on there, Mike?
Neil, good evening to you. We've got a whole lot of Texas Democrats filing into here to watch the numbers coming in. It looks like a good evening for Bernie Sanders so far. We'll see how the rest of the state plays out. It is still quite early, but across the state we've heard a lot of enthusiasm from Texas Democrats. 2-hour waits in polling locations here in Austin. Similar scenes in Dallas and Houston as well as we've traveled across the state. A number of Texas Democrats I've spoken to along the way say their top issues are health care, and they also just want to win. They want a change in leadership in the White House. Bottom line, a lot of buzz here tonight in Austin, Texas. Texas Democratic Party officials say turnout was excellent today, and they feel like all things considered, it went very smoothly for a big primary in a huge state. 228 delegates at stake here, and we saw, of course, the establishment rally around Joe Biden in the last 24 to 36 hours. You had Amy Klobuchar come in, Pete Buttigieg come in, and Texan Beto O'Rourke trying to push Joe Biden across the finish line. We will see if it worked. I should note, before Election Day, more than 1 million Texans voted early in the Democratic primary, and so obviously their votes may go to Buttigieg or Klobuchar, and obviously the candidates still in the race. An exciting night here in Austin, Texas, the liberal hub in what is traditionally a red red Republican state.
No, you're right. It stands out like a sore thumb. Thank you, Michael, very, very much. You know, Kristen, there's always that hope Democrats have that, hey, we could flip this state blue. Used to be reliably blue back in JFK's time and before then. Now, you know, anything but. But if Bernie Sanders comes away with a win in Texas and gets a chunk of those 228 delegates, I mean, can Democrats realistically think of winning that state? It's a tough one.
That's a real tough one. Bear in mind that in the last presidential election, Donald Trump won Texas by about 9 points, but he also won Ohio by about 9 points. And remember, Ohio was the quintessential swing state. It was the deciding state in the 2004 election. And so you do see the map from time to time change as demographic shifts realign themselves, voters realign themselves. But Texas is sort of loosey holding the football for Democrats. Right. They keep thinking they're going to get it, and they just simply either don't have the right candidate. That tends to be the big problem, whether it was Beto O'Rourke. You know, he got folks pretty excited, but wasn't enough. I think I would say if I'm a Democrat, I'm focused on trying to pick off some of those blue wall states that flipped that Donald Trump won. That's where I would put some of my effort before I would try to turn.
Got it. You know, one of the things, Governor, that's interesting about Texas, you know, a lot of people are moving there, you know, from the high tax confines of places like California and New York. But the workers who are moving over there are generally more Democratic constituency type workers who are maybe ironically forcing that change. What do you think?
Well, I think in the end, the president's still going to carry this state. But one of the subplots, and Congressman, you can appreciate this having served in the Congress, one of the subplots in Texas and elsewhere, and I believe part of the reason why the push was made to coalesce around Biden is that if you've got Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket, it's harder to win those lower ticket. Not only the possibility of losing the House, but also losing state legislative races. Where they do have a shot in Texas, and where Greg Abbott and others are trying to rally the forces, is to protect their state legislative races. If Bernie Sanders is on the top of the ticket in a place like Texas, that's really hard for Democrats to make inroads as well as elsewhere around the country. How do you
make the economic argument in Texas that we need socialism when you have, what, 3% unemployment, where wages of workers, many of them Hispanic, are going up because of the boom in construction? I was in Denton, Texas about a year ago. I couldn't believe my old man was an iron worker, right? We used to put those rebars in the ground. There were miles of this. These are working class people who are getting good wages. I don't know how you sell that to the typical Hispanic. Now, ironically, Bernie apparently does well with Hispanics, and I kind of don't get that. But you know, maybe it's a generational thing. I don't.
But he doesn't do as well, right, with African American voters, and that's the problem for Bernie Sanders, right? He might pick up a little bit of support among Hispanics, but his weakness is that. Right?
And it seems like his weakness with African American voters is generally with African American voters over the age of 50. He fares better with younger voters, period, and African American voters fall into that as well. I would argue, first of all, you're right, Governor, the down ballot races, and I would even argue in a state like Texas, district attorney races and city council races where you have outsized authority given to those local governments. You understand it as well as any, sir, on this panel. Finally, the issue of the economy going strong, I think, and it is in a lot of ways, the issue is affordability for American families. And the question in this race, I believe, if you have the right Democrat and you're talking about capitalism versus capitalism, is how do we ensure that capitalism works for every American?
Why are you so sure that you personally, that the party's so sure that Joe Biden is that right Democrat?
Well, I know this. If you are arguing that capitalism is the way and the way to our future, a path that will make America stronger and greater, more prosperous, you have a much better chance of making this argument. Joe Biden is in that lane. My concern is if it's capitalism versus socialism. Look, there's some people who argue there are benefits of socialism. I don't quite understand them and don't agree with those things. You'll never get to those elements of the argument because people will dismiss it to the point that's been made by other people here.
The other thing to bear in mind is that a lot of the young voters that really like Bernie Sanders that may or may not be turning out to vote, so certainly it looks like they're not turning out to vote the number Sanders had hoped for. Many of them don't define socialism as the government seizes the means of production. They think socialism means we all work together, we hold hands, everybody's nicer and a little more equal.
So you're saying they talk a good game, but when they have to go out and vote, they don't deliver.
That's right, which I think creates some interesting dynamics.
I'm glad a young person said that rather than I had said that.
Well, you know, but the thing to bear in mind is that when the right candidate is there, young voters will turn out. When the stakes are correct, they'll turn out. This Democratic primary doesn't seem like it's that for them.
But Sanders can't get about 30% of the vote in any state. So he has 30% of that group in the Democratic Party. If he was scoring 50, 60% some places, I would. So I'm just saying that's the one area. Can that group be brought around and persuaded that you can achieve the goals that Senator Sanders wants without adopting a new way of government,
That will be what Biden's people are going to be telling the Bloomberg people tomorrow. And, you know, you keep hearing that Obama might pipe up and say something. I mean, you know, we've heard.
I think he probably did the Klobuchar.
Yeah, but he's playing a role. And
we shall see. We shall see. All right, just to let you know where we stand right now, of the 14 contests up for grabs tonight, 6 have already been decided. It's still early. Vermont and Colorado for Bernie Sanders. He's doing very well in a couple of other states. It's just too early to call. And for Joe Biden in Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and Alabama, among some of the bigger delegate prizes of the night. But it is still early. Our futures market, which is something you get as an added extra with no extra fee, are all soaring right now. Not so much based on this, although a lot of people lunge at this type of news as the worse things look for Bernie Sanders, the better things look for the futures. That might be a bit of a flip read on this. That's the read we're going with for the time being. That and the fact that the Asian markets are trying to recover from the huge sell-off that we had here, the coronavirus, which is coming up more often these days on the part of both parties. Stay with us. Our continued coverage on Fox Business continues. All right, welcome back to our continuing coverage on Fox Business. I'm Neil Cavuto. Well, it is the second biggest, delegate prize of the night. The 228 delegates at stake in the Lone Star State, the state of Texas, right now, where it's still way too close to call. But with a third of the vote in, shall we say, tight. Deirdre Bolton has been taking a very close look at some key counties there for the latest. Hey, Deirdre.
Hey, Neil. Yep. Let me call up some of these here. See if we can get this magic Mac working. So one area that I wanted to focus on was Austin, Texas, because as we know, it is kind of a mini Silicon Valley. You have Apple, you have Dell, you have IBM. All of those in and around the Austin area. One thing to note as well is that it is known as being very liberal, maybe not a surprise since I'm drawing that illusion, if you like, to Silicon Valley. And then, of course, we're sort of looking at the coast over here in the sense of being a big energy place. So just kind of following some of these economic places, or rather economic indicators. Now, all the way over here, as we know, Representative Beto O'Rourke, El Paso, that is where he came from. And as we know, he has in fact endorsed Joe Biden, so we will see if that makes a big picture, big difference. Massachusetts, we continue to follow as well, and the idea being, of course, that if Senator Warren does not have a very strong presence there, that will be very bad news for her this evening. And just as a reminder, Neil, before I throw it back to you, in 2016, it was so close between Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton, showing us this face-off between a mainstream candidate and a progressive one. Neil, back to you.
And quite the face-off of that. In the meantime, Hillary Vaughn in West Palm Beach, Florida, at Michael Bloomberg's headquarters. He addressed the media a little earlier than we thought, and some people were saying, uh-oh, what's he up to? We know he's still very much in the race and still very much engaged, huh?
That's right, Neil. In fact, moments after Bloomberg left the stage, they blasted the song from the Bee Gees, Stayin' Alive, over the speakers. That's certainly the message from the campaign tonight. He isn't going anywhere, even though his $500 million so far has not won him any states. But I talked to a campaign source who talks about their Super Tuesday strategy with me tonight, and they told me it was never about winning states, but just winning. Bloomberg tonight making it clear he is playing the long game. He held his rally in Florida tonight. They vote 2 weeks from now. He said that's actually a state that he thinks he can win, not only in the primary, but also headed into November. Earlier today, he said that it was Joe Biden that was the spoiler in the race, not him for staying in the race. Neil, back to you.
All right, Ellie, thank you very much. Tennessee has gone for Joe Biden. We can mark that down in the 64 delegates at stake in Tennessee. Of course, it had the horrific tornado last night that killed 24. But for Joe Biden, it is a very significant pickup. And it's how they'll be apportioned out, of course, anyone's guess. But it represents his 5th win of the evening. If you add Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Alabama, and now Tennessee. All right, to former Reagan economic advisor Art Laffer on how the night is sorting out. It's obviously, it's still early, we're not anywhere near done, but it's interesting, Art, that the Democrats seem to be coalescing around the moderate rather than the socialist, and that he represents, Joe Biden, their best chance. But if you break it down, I've been doing rough math, the non-Sanders vote, and by that I'm just throwing in Michael Bloomberg, not so much even Elizabeth Warren, who's very much like Bernie Sanders. That non-Sanders, non-extreme vote is beating comfortably by a little bit more than half the vote recorded thus far for the more moderate choice. What do you make of that?
I think it's wonderful. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's economics is disastrous. I mean, I think they'd be easier to run against for President Trump, but I would not like to see that. I'd like to see the Democrats be more reasonable, more clear thinking, like Harold Ford, and I'd like to see the Democratic Party be in competition with good economic policies, and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are just not there. The one that's shocking me, Neil, is watching Mayor Bloomberg. You know, for $500 million, you should get a lot more than what he's getting.
You know, he is picking up along in some of the other states. It's interesting, Art. He is just over that 15% mark. Not in all of them, but for a while it was looking like 12 or 11, and he did not even get that. Still early in the evening, because I noticed in some of these states where he was over 15, he drops to 14, or to your point, you need 15% to get some share of the delegates. But he's not quitting, and I wonder if it's a wise position to be in if you know, let's just put it this way. Biden, even with his victories, you know, has not had the smoothest performance on the stump. And if you want to be an alternative to him, I mean, there's no purpose in Michael Bloomberg, you know, hanging it up, right?
No, I mean, Michael Bloomberg's just trying to be the spoiler like he has been in so many things lately, and he wants to get just enough delegates there so he can really mess up the Democratic convention. And that's not a good way to play the game. I mean, to be honest with you, he should have been out on the road, running in all the races, doing what everyone else did, and letting us see him up front. I mean, the first debate he was in, Neil, was really a catastrophe for him. And, you know, we haven't seen him perform. We haven't seen his policies. It's too bad, but he is trying to be the spoiler. Now, Biden, I'm surprised, and I got to tell you, I'm pleasantly surprised that Biden's doing a lot better than I thought he would, especially after the initial Iowa and New Hampshire. Biden's doing quite well, and that's far better than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, for at least from my standpoint. Good economics should be bipartisan, Neil, and it should be the two parties trying to get the best economic policies. And the Democrats just have not been doing that. They've been negative on everything that's good. And for the first time, I think we're showing the extreme on the Democrats is not panning out. At least I hope it's not.
Interesting read, Art. You know, Governor Scott Walker with us from Wisconsin, and you know, it's interesting what he said.
I love Scott.
Hey, love you, Art, too, Art.
You know, it's interesting what Art just said there too, and it got me thinking about the role and how it's changed now for New Hampshire and Iowa, and all of a sudden, if it works, what Biden has done. To wait and pick up and get a late start in South Carolina, pick up and continue on Super Tuesday, he could could be rechanging how this all breaks out.
Well, remember tonight we're doing about a third of all the delegates.
Yeah.
In the first 4 states, we had, what, 155? Right. So it's a whole different ball game now. But he had to show, at least in one of those 4 races, some momentum. We thought, any of us who watched this thought all along it was going to be South Carolina. And I think the good news is for the voters is they're going to have a real shot for many months to come. My primary, for example, for Democrats in Wisconsin doesn't come in for a few more weeks into April. But Bloomberg's
should have pulled to California and just front loaded it up right away.
Bloomberg's got to get out. If I'm a Democrat looking at this, I think there's no way, absolutely no way, he can achieve what's necessary to win the nomination. He's talking about bringing it through the convention. That's just not going to happen. And in the end, he's going to get blamed by folks if Joe Biden's not the nominee. I still believe Bernie Sanders is going to be it. And if Bloomberg stays in, it's even more likely.
You know, stranger, memory serves me right, to the battle that Ronald Reagan had taking on an incumbent president, Gerald Ford, in 1976. Darn near pulled it off. But as Harold Ford was mentioning here, these battles, even though they aren't brokered conventions, they're sort of broken relations. And it's very tough for a party to come back from that. If it gets to that for Democrats, that could be a tough road.
Yeah. You know, if you look at Trump, I mean, I think we had a really broken group there. I thought we had a lot of hostilities there. I mean, when you saw Trump coming into the general election, he was not the favorite of every Republican. Believe me, he was not. What really gives me hope right now is that Trump has solidified the Republican support. In 2016, you know, he had not solidified the Republican support. There were a lot of never-Trumpers then. There are very few never-Trumpers now. I think it's tilting much more towards Trump in this election, and I think the Democrats are going at it way too strongly, and I think it's going to only get nastier.
All right, but it's still early. They seem to be organizing and getting past their little fights than where Republicans were 4 years ago, right?
Ours lasted right up to the last hour.
Right.
I mean, it really did. If you
but
remember
it's proof
Ted
that you can
Cruz
still win even with that, right?
Yep, and he still won even with that. Imagine what he can do with the support. I mean, Ted Cruz is now his biggest supporter. You know, it's just amazing what's happened to the Republican Party in the last 4 years.
And seeing as his father was behind the Kennedy assassination and all that, I mean, that was ugly. All right, Art Laffer, we shall see. Thank you, my friend.
How do you remember that?
I do. I remember it all. I remember every nasty little moment.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Art Laffer, very, very much. We have a lot more coming up. Kennedy will be joining us. We'll get the latest on how Texas is sorting out between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. You know, just the notion of Bernie Sanders winning Texas, you know, the cowboy hats, and it's like socialist states, Texas. I'm sorry, it's an image I can't get out of my head. More after this. All right, we are now 7 states we can comfortably call of the 14 up for grabs tonight. We're still awaiting decisions in Maine, in Massachusetts, in Minnesota, and Texas, and Arkansas. The states that we can call right now for Bernie Sanders, his home state of Vermont and Colorado. For Joe Biden, big wins in Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Alabama, and a few moments ago, Tennessee. So we're looking at all of that. We're going to continue digesting all of this and where we go. We've got our own Kennedy, and we've got Greg Rayburn here, the former Hostess CEO. He's a real schmitty pants look at the corporate world and how it blends with the political world. Kennedy, to you first, and early on, the read here is that Joe Biden was on life support a little more than 72 hours ago, and he could come out of this evening with the most delegates. What the heck happened?
What happened was the establishment coalesced, and it was not only the candidates, it was the media and the DNC, and you realize how powerful of an operation they're actually running. And they don't just suggest that people get in line. It was a call to action, especially for these moderate candidates, because it became very, very clear to people that there are 2 lanes in this race. There's been a split in the Democrat Party before 2016. That chasm was not healed field after Bernie Sanders was sort of pushed aside by the DNC, and they realized that his movement has only gained popularity and a lot of young, passionate support, and it was only growing and growing. And then they realized, it was the moment of truth, and that's when the establishment really got these people in line. And I still want to know what Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar were promised for stepping out of the way right before Super Tuesday.
What do you think, Greg?
They were promised positions. I mean, that timing's not an accident. In fact, I wasn't prescient enough to see that coming. I was talking with my youngest son the other day about, I said, after Tuesday, Pete will drop out, Klobuchar will drop out, Tom will drop out. And then he starts texting me each day saying, Dad, you were right, but they're doing it now. And I'm like,
But don't you think, that South Carolina alone could have changed things, that people were so surprised that they just, whoa.
Well, not only that he won, but that Biden won convincing.
Right.
And even that was a little bit of clever. I mean, again, you've got House leaders.
Absolutely.
He's the number 3 guy in the House. They're looking at this matchup I talked about before, where down ballot, they stand to lose the House itself as well as state legislative races. Huge deal. And think about this. To me, this is one of the most unprecedented moves of earned media. Bloomberg's got paid media. Bernie's got a field, an army of volunteers and activists. But the DNC and the establishment itself put together this earned media campaign, not only with the other candidates, but with all these other efforts. And you saw all across America, the headlines were, all these people moving towards Biden. It's had a positive impact. And a key error, I think, in Massachusetts, Bernie went there to try and take out Warren, and in doing so, it looks like early votes, he's splitting the vote, and Biden could come out and win that. That would be a huge win, because otherwise his prospects were the best in the South. He picks up Massachusetts. That's a huge win strategically.
Well, the down ticket argument came out in the last debate.
Yes.
I mean, that's when you started to see that, and I think that's what precipitated this, quote, consolidation.
But if you're Michael Bloomberg and you're hoping that, no one wins on a first ballot, it's well worth him staying in the race, right?
It's worth it for him. I mean, you're hosed if you're a Democrat or anyone else who's not fully in the Sanders camp. But, Governor Walker, he was one of the few people who was saying this movement has so much momentum. Do not get comfortable where you are right now. He was saying that in the 2018 midterms. And a lot of Republicans lost their seats because of that complacency. And so what I think you're seeing, when you talk about the establishment, it's people like Nancy Pelosi, because she'll say one thing in public. She'll come out and say, oh, I would absolutely support Bernie Sanders if he were our nominee. But then in private, that's all she's looking at is the fundraising and those down ballot races.
Well, some of the older Democrats remember George McGovern, and they fear that. They feared 1972, where he had the passion of the party and everything with him, but he ends up losing in a landslide.
Well, this year's even more difficult because 72 was past the census. The undercover message in all this is redistricting happens starting next year, and that will affect whether Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy is the speaker. If they lose down the ballot, they don't just stand the risk of losing the House now. They could be out of whack for the next decade.
All right, I want to bring Jackie DeAngelo into this. She's been reading what's on voters' minds and has some of the late-breaking findings.
And Neil, we are waiting for Texas and we're waiting for California because those are the two that have the most delegates at stake. So what was the big issue in Texas that has 228 delegates at stake? One of them is immigration. And voter analysis showed that Joe Biden was favored in terms of handling immigration. Bernie Sanders second, Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren was last. Let's switch gears to California because the polls are still open. They will be open till 11 p.m. Eastern time. And the issue that we were looking at there is sort of the late deciders overall have been favoring Biden. Well, they were favoring him there as well. 35%, then Sanders, then Bloomberg. Also in California, known as a progressive state, more than half said actually that they want a candidate who will pursue practical centrist policies. 57% gives you a sense of where their minds are tonight.
Very interesting. Jackie, thank you very, very much. We are still awaiting Massachusetts, as our esteemed panelists were saying. It might be a classic case right now where you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren splitting the vote there, and someone like a Joe Biden can sort of run up the middle here. But again, it is way, way too early to tell here, but it's one of those states that obviously carries with it a lot of delegates. 91, about the fourth biggest prize of the evening. But for Joe Biden, the real story is, well, Joe Biden. He is back from being dead and counted out. A reminder again to pundits and those who do this for a living that you never, ever bury someone. I think in the case of Scott Walker, the recount election, they thought he was finished. He wasn't. A little more to this. All right, on this Super Tuesday evening, I want you to take a quick peek at what's happening in the futures arena right now. I'm not tying this to any of the events here or a perceived slowdown or a bit of a stumble for Bernie Sanders, no friend of the financial community, and I think he would feel the same way about them. But anyway, the fact that he is having potentially a bumpy night or that Joe Biden is suddenly doing better, Biden is deemed simply more moderate or more accepting of the financial community. In this cast of characters running for the Democratic nomination, moderate is just in terms of the trillions in tax hikes over the next 10 years you want. Leaving that aside here, a very good night for stock traders after getting pounded a little earlier. We'll have a read on the Asian market shortly here. This is not the exclusive event here. It's hot and cold when it comes to how they respond to the coronavirus. Pretty much on the trade talks, the better things look for this thing stabilizing, better for stocks. The worse it looks as this CDC comment of a possible pandemic and the president behind the 8 ball on this, the worse it looks for stocks. So that's a whole nother sort of thing at play here. In the meantime, of the 14 primary up for grabs tonight, as we go rolling through some of these Asian markets as they're beginning to come in, we can safely report on 7 states, Vermont and Colorado, that have gone right now for Bernie Sanders and for Joe Biden: Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee. We are still waiting to hear from the likes of Maine and Massachusetts and Arkansas, Texas and Minnesota, and then of course at 10 p.m. we get Utah. But that again, these earlier states that closed earlier, again, too close to call. Jonathan Hunt, meanwhile, at Joe Biden headquarters. And Jonathan, I'm just thinking of the complete turnaround in this man's campaign. You know, he was a dead man walking before South Carolina, wins it in a landslide. He gets 2 out of 3 African-American votes, and it's been the wind at his back since.
Yeah, any way you look at it, Neil, tonight represents an extraordinary surge for the former Vice President Joe Biden, and his campaign staff are telling us this evening that they are, quote, thrilled at the way it's played out so far. They are very optimistic about Texas. We're still obviously waiting for the results to be called there, but they are feeling good. They are feeling, according to some of them, talking to our staff with them right now, that they could pull out a win there. That would obviously be hugely significant, the second biggest prize of the night, and certainly a state that Senator Sanders was pretty confident just a few days ago of winning. Then, of course, we get California. Polls close here in about an hour and 14 minutes. We expect the vice president to be out here addressing this crowd before the polls close. I get the sense, Neil, that he is waiting to see how Texas plays out before he steps on to that stage, because that will define how he portrays the night. Certainly, though, this has been a very good night for the former vice president so far, and now he's looking at how well he does in California. His staff have said they're cautiously optimistic. Now, what cautious optimism represents in California, hard to say, Neil, but it may be that a strong second they would feel very good about, given how far ahead Bernie Sanders was in all the polls we were seeing, how much stronger his ground game has been in California, how many more appearances he has made in California than Joe Biden. So if they were to get a strong second here, and you think, Neil, just a few days ago, we were talking about how the moderates in this nomination race could split the vote to such an extent here in California that none of them might reach the necessary 15% threshold to get any delegates. Well, that has certainly been blown out of of the water now. And Joe Biden certainly looks on course to pick up a good number of delegates here, and obviously a raft of delegates across the country. We talked about that center lane all the time. Well, Joe Biden is speeding down it right now at pretty much the full speed limit, Neil.
All right, well put, Jonathan. Thank you very, very much. By the way, we're getting a report right now that the campaign manager for Michael Bloomberg, Kevin Cheeky, is saying that they are examining and re-examining the campaign, constantly reevaluating. This in response apparently to an NBC report that Bloomberg will reassess his campaign tomorrow. Now, there are others who've been emailing me from outside the campaign who say that it's all about how many 15%ers we get. By the 15% of how much, at a minimum, they've reached that threshold, the threshold at which you can get delegates. And if they fall under that in state after state, and right now they had been over 15%, but in a number of states I know they're dipping under 15%. Right now with former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, that would be a decider, right? Because if you're amassing delegates, it's better than not amassing delegates.
Well,
and if
remember,
you fall under 15, you're not.
Right. Remember John Kasich? There was a lot of talk from the Kasich camp all the way up, leading almost to the convention, that he was hoping for the same sort of scenario, that he would amass some support. Well, in the end, he really only got the home state of Ohio, didn't have close contest elsewhere to pick up delegates. And so Bloomberg, if he...
Well, the Republican is a little different. It's winner take all of those.
Well, exactly. And that, but that's even more so the case because in the situation here where you just got to get above the 15%, there's a $500 million reasons why he should be reassessing this campaign. The statements you heard earlier tonight, frankly, are the statements of a loser, of a losing campaign who's not going anywhere. And so just for his own sake, his supporters' sake, but I think even though others were saying earlier he's got to get out for Biden to win, I don't buy into that. I think the fact that you had Klobuchar and Mayor Buttigieg get out signaled that this is really a contest between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. He is still going to have a rough road if he's the nominee against the president. I mean, think of all his gaffes. Think about the scandals with his son Hunter and others out there. This is by no means a foregone conclusion, but it has decisively been a good night for Joe Biden on the pathway towards coming back to be a nominee.
It's all about the math, Kennedy, right? I mean, and does someone proportionally going to the primary after primary amass that 1,991 if the same individuals are still in the race by summertime? It's tough, no matter what the scenario.
It is. It's exciting for people who cover politics, but it's really rough for the party. And, Michael Bloomberg has been doing his own math. He spent $55 million on TV ads in California alone.
All that is just about denying someone a win on the first ballot, right?
That's all it is for him. Yes, he knows that. He knows he got into the race late, and he's patting himself on the back.
But wouldn't the kick be that denies Joe Biden the first ballot?
Of course. And that's why he got in, because he didn't have confidence in Joe Biden.
Sure.
No one did. And I don't think, frankly, Biden's campaign was run very well. Now, if you talk about the shift in the last 72 hours, something has happened to Joe Biden as well. I think the confidence has been very good for him. But obviously, the people who are pulling the levers have said to him, this is exactly what you have to do. You have to stop making gaffes. You have to stop freestyling when you're on the stump, because you're only hurting yourself. And so I think, they're acting like establishment consultants and locking it up.
Joe Biden is doing something right. He's just picked up Arkansas right now. You think about that, guys. This is something that continues a theme for him where, thanks to a strong, African-American vote, again, against what you got into, that's something you could rely on and extend your appeal. I'm looking at all of this, Greg, and we were showing the futures market before and stocks running up. I understand Wall Street not flipping over the prospect of a Bernie Sanders as the nominee, one step short of becoming president. But are they that much better off with the Joe Biden?
I think most people would tell you that they prefer Bloomberg, and from a market perspective, right? Than a Biden, and certainly than a Bernie presidency. I think to the point you were just discussing, it's interesting to me that there's been no endorsement from Obama And I think he's.
But he wouldn't do that until the end, right?
Why? There's no reason for him not to, right? I mean, it gets more valuable every day.
Yeah.
And if we go where we look like we're going to, nobody on a first ballot or a brokered convention or however that pans out, then there's a lot of value to that. And it's a game changer, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of who ends up getting it. But the markets, Neil, I mean, the markets, when the markets correct, when they need to correct, sellers just have whatever excuses they have. Coronavirus is an excuse, right? We are what are we, 5%, 7% off the all-time record highs? And people think they're losing their minds. Right. The Dow I'm looking at is at 26,000.
Was it 16,000 when the president
That's
took office?
insane, right?
Yeah.
So coronavirus, that's a problem. There will be real impacts. But the market needed to correct. I mean, the market had was at a level where most people that I know that follow.
You don't get a feeling that there's more to this virus thing that's worrisome?
I think that's a real thing that I think we're feeling the effects now already, and it's very hard to quantify. But from a stock market perspective, it's a little funny to me because stocks like Amazon are getting thrown out like the baby's going out with the bathwater. If you really think about it, that's a stock that should do well if nobody wants to leave their house.
They're making so much off those masks.
Well,
have you gone on to look for them? They're like $60 a piece.
But if nobody wants to leave their house,
I don't want to join you guys. We are waiting. We're going to take a quick break here. We are waiting right now for Utah at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. polls close in California. But so far in this race, we have 8 states told up that if you were to know that Joe Biden would be winning 6 of the 8 in the biggest contest thus far, you'd say, I'm crazy. Well, I'm not crazy. I just told you that. More to this. All right, polls have just closed in Utah, a state with 29 delegates here, but I want to just tell you where we stand right now in the futures market. That is an added freebie you get here on Fox Business. You're welcome, America. Take a look at the futures right now. We're up at 305 points. Now, a lot of this might be at the heels of a report that we had earlier on Fox Business today. We were discussing it on my afternoon show. It picked up a little bit of steam with some whisperings on Fox News, and we were doing my afternoon show there. And one of the things that was talked about, besides coordinated central bank intervention to support markets the world over, was this talk that the World Bank would step in and help out. Now we're getting the details that the World Bank has. It's announced $12 billion in immediate financing to help countries dealing with this, particularly disadvantaged countries. This $12 billion in financing is immediate and will be dispensed immediately. This, of course, on the heels of our own Federal Reserve in this country cutting interest rates half a point. A lot of good that did. Market just fell flat after that. So we'll get into details on that. But in the meantime, yet another state has tipped its way into the Joe Biden camp. In case you're keeping track here, this is the 7th one of the 14 primaries today. Minnesota goes for Joe Biden. Amy Klobuchar's state, of course. But it's interesting here that for Joe Biden with Minnesota, he picked up Arkansas and Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, Virginia, North Carolina. For Bernie Sanders thus far, his home state of Vermont and Colorado. Now, there are a couple of biggies we are waiting on and still do not have. They include Maine and Massachusetts, simply too close to call. We're also trying to get some clarity out of California later tonight, which is the big one of 415 delegates at stake there. Edward Lawrence following all of this very, very closely for us. He's at Bernie Sanders' headquarters. Where is it in Vermont? It's not Burlington. I know that.
Yeah, exactly, Neil. And we were told that Bernie Sanders is in the building now. The crowd here expecting him to speak any moment now. We're seeing some folks fill in back here on the stage and some other activity going on around this. Senator Bernie Sanders hoped to have a very big night tonight, but they're really focused on Texas here. They're looking at any updates in this crowd for where Texas stands and how Bernie Sanders is doing in Texas. And then they're hopeful for California later on tonight. They believe that those 2 states will sort of propel this campaign campaign to go forward. Again, they're hoping for a good showing in Massachusetts, you mentioned, also Maine. It's interesting to note here that in 2016, Bernie Sanders was doing a little bit better than he was doing tonight. At this point in 2016, he had won Oklahoma, he had won South Carolina. Now, that could be seen a little bit as maybe the anti-Hillary Clinton vote, and that's not happening this time around. But this campaign has a significant ground game, and they're utilizing that ground game, especially in California, to try and get that big prize. Back to you, Neil.
All right. Essex Junction, I meant to say. I apologize for that. I thought it was Burlington, Vermont. So waiting here for Bernie Sanders there. My panelists joining me right now, my buddy Kennedy. We got Jerry Baker. And last but not least, Lee Carter. Lee, how is this sorting out in your eyes? I mean, for Joe Biden, I mean, I wonder, had he not had the successful Saturday he had in South Carolina, would any of this be happening?
No, it wouldn't be. Not only did he need South Carolina, the other candidates really needed to look at their polling and realize that there was no path for them to get there. So Amy Klobuchar and Mayor Pete had to look at it and say, really, it's going to be tough. The only chance we have is in a brokered convention, and that's true of what the polls said. The fact that he was able to pull everybody together and say, come down to Texas, endorse me, we're going to be on the same page, that was a big deal. Because when we saw that voters right now, I forget, 55% or something of voters made their decision in the last 24 hours over who they're going to vote for, which is just unbelievable. These guys have been running for a year, and they're just deciding now. So what that tells me is support for Joe Biden is soft. He now needs to earn it. He is, by all accounts, people were saying that his campaign was dead just a few weeks ago. Now
he's still the same lousy campaign. I don't mean to disparage him, but that did not change, right?
Well, I think he got a little bit more disciplined, right? When in his public remarks, he did a little bit less ad-libbing, had speeches stuck to the script, was a bit shorter. Very kind of, he didn't do so well, but he was somewhat more disciplined. No question about that. But obviously there was just this rallying around and this who was going to stop Sanders. Clearly, after Bloomberg's disastrous debate performance, it wasn't going to be Bloomberg, and it clearly wasn't going to be after Nevada and South Carolina.
49% of all new income to go to the 1%, when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, I don't know what's going to happen later tonight. We're doing well in Texas right now. We won Colorado. And I'm cautiously optimistic that later in the evening we can win the largest state in this country, the state of California. But no matter what happens, if this campaign, and I don't know what will happen, but if it comes out to be a campaign in which we have one candidate who is standing up for the working class and the middle class, we're going to win that election. And if we have another candidate who has received contributions from at least 60 billionaires, we're going to win that election. And if there is another candidate in the race who is spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, we're going to tell him, in America, you cannot buy elections. So I am excited about where we are. We have come a long, long way. And I want to, once again, thank the great state of Vermont and all of the people in the state. Not only for the victory you gave our movement tonight, but for the years and years of love and support you have given me and my family. So Vermont, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you all very much. Let's go on to the White House. Thank you.
All right, Bernie Sanders, celebrating his performance today. Utah, while we were waiting, went his way. So not only did he win his home state of Vermont, but Colorado as well. And Utah, right now, the other states have gone, by and large, Joe Biden's way from Virginia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Minnesota. So in case you're counting, 7 states for Joe Biden, 3 right now for Bernie Sanders. We're waiting on Texas, the 228 delegates. Massachusetts, still too close to call, with about 91 delegates. Maine, that's proven to be a real tough battle to decide with 24. And, of course, polls about 43 minutes away from closing in the state of California, by far the largest prize tonight with 415 delegates. Jonathan Hoenig joins our panel right now. Jonathan, it's a little too early to sort of sort out the market implications of this. I did notice earlier futures were jumping pretty nicely. I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that Bernie Sanders, who's an anathema to traders, is having a problematic day, or at least more of a problematic day than a lot of people thought he would. But right now, Joe Biden stands to have a very good shot at getting most of the delegates up for grabs tonight. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, Neil, let's set the stage. I mean, coming into this evening's contest, only 18% of stocks were above their short-term moving average. Today, you had about 350 new lows, only about 30 new highs. So this was a very weak market, especially, interestingly, a lot of the bank stocks, Northern Trust, HSBC, Credit Suisse, not exactly some of Bernie Sanders' favorite companies. The futures market actually opened lower. At one point, it was about 100 points lower. But as Joe Biden's wins have piled up, the futures markets have moved in that direction. This is a Joe Biden rally. And, Bernie Sanders talks a lot about, wanting to tear down the system. The futures markets seem to be responding to Joe Biden's wins right now. That's what's prompted this rally just in the last couple of hours.
But, the one thing that kind of weirds me out on that, if you think about it, Jonathan, is that Joe Biden arguably would have a better shot, if you buy consensus, always dangerous, against Donald Trump. And so he could be the bigger threat if he emerges as the more likely nominee,
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to be what the markets are saying, but it's a tremendous turnaround for Biden. The online predictions markets just about a month ago had Biden's chances at about 7%. This evening, Biden's chances of being the nominee are about 70%. So, what we've learned tonight, interestingly, is that the Democratic Party maybe not as committed to socialism as we thought, but certainly committed against billionaires. Can you imagine a worse showing forget about Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg as well, having a very ugly, very difficult night. So the Democrats certainly set against billionaires, but warming up to the so-called moderate in Joe Biden, and the market likes it.
All right, we're waiting to hear from Joe Biden, by the way. Jerry Baker, you can look at this and say there's a Republican in the White House right now, and with his getting his way for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates like today, first intra-meeting such cut since the financial crisis, and stocks still tanked.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's just this uncertainty about coronavirus. We are in a stage of rapid.
Sorry, my friend, keep Massachusetts for Joe Biden. So again, taking advantage of that battle in the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren splitting the vote, and Joe Biden sneaks in and wins his 8th primary of the night. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and look, I think there's also a little concern that maybe people aren't really quite clear why the Federal Reserve has done this. I didn't think Jay Powell's press conference was particularly convincing. Nobody thinks the Federal Reserve can make people go out to dinner again if they're not going to go, or get on a plane if they're not going to go because they're afraid of coronavirus. And what the Federal Reserve has done, in some people's view, is thrown away 50 basis points of what it had left, which was only 150 basis points.
They don't have a lot of arrows.
They haven't given themselves much to do, and the market, sold off accordingly.
Kennedy, what do you think?
I just want to get back to Massachusetts a little bit, because people have been wondering, well, why is Elizabeth Warren staying in the race? She's staying in the race because she has defined herself as an establishment progressive. And yes, that's a niche market, but she's doing 2 things in this race right now. Number one, in debates, she is very effectively going after Michael Bloomberg. No one else has been able to land the death blows that she has, particularly in legal matters. And also in Massachusetts, she's a great goalie. So what she's doing is she is preventing Bernie Sanders from getting those 91 delegates in Massachusetts. He'll get a share of them. They all will, from what appears to be happening right now. But Joe Biden is going to win a state that he shouldn't win when he's battling someone from Massachusetts, a popular senator from
And what's interesting, Elizabeth Warren is in third place in her own state. Joe Biden, who just won his first primary 72 hours ago in a 30-year quest for the presidency, has now picked up 8 more. No one saw this coming, but the vice president was given up for dead. He's alive and well, thank you very much.
Super Tuesday for nothing. By the way, this is my little sister, Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh, no, this is my... Oh, you switched on me. This is my wife. This is my sister. They switched on me. Folks, it's still early, but things are looking awful, awful good. For those who've been knocked down, counted out, left behind, this is your campaign. Just a few days ago, the press and the pundits had declared the campaign dead. Who wrote a poem called The Curatorian. Here's what he says, and I believe this with the bottom of my being. He said, history says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. We can make hope and history rhyme because of what we're saying. There's nothing we can't do. This is about the future. It's not about the past. It's about our children and our grandchildren. It's about leading this country and leading the world once again. Folks, we just have to remember who we are. My Lord, this is the United States of America. And it's time for America to get back up and once again fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. We say it so often in school, we don't realize how profound it is. We've never lived up to those words, but until this president, we've never walked away from it. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe with every fiber of my being, that's who we are. So let's get back up. We are a decent, brave, resilient people. We can believe again. But we are better than this moment. We are better than this president. So get back up and take back this country, the United States of America. There's not a single thing we can't do. God bless you, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, a very happy Joe Biden. Think about it. With his 8 primary victories tonight so far, and South Carolina on Saturday, over the last 72 hours, he has won more contests than he has over the last 30-plus years in 3 different runs for president. That is an astounding development, and he apparently is saying he's not done. Looking forward to see how California turns out. Some other contests that are still too close to call include Texas and Maine, and again, the aforementioned California. Kennedy, you've been watching all of this, and you're not convinced Biden's putting it all together.
No, if there's one thing that presidential politics tells us now, we are in the postmodern era. Yes, there are no more rules. But having said that, if we are going to see big shifts from one administration to the next, and I think what we're doing now is making massive shifts, and it's all about the pendulum. So if the pendulum were going to swing in the opposite direction, it would swing for Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden is not enough of a shift in order to change out of this administration, particularly during economic flourishing. He's not transformational. Bernie Sanders, whether you like him or not, whether you despise the ideas that he espouses, he is a transformational person. He is truly a once-in-a-generation
You don't think Joe Biden could do better against the president than Bernie Sanders?
I actually do not. I actually think that I think that Bernie Sanders would have done better against Trump in 2016 than Joe Biden.
I agree with absolutely all of that. And I think, look, the history of the last 50 years, every time the Democrats pick the establishment candidate, the insider with the long Washington experience, they've lost.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Al Gore in 2000. They've lost. And when they've picked the outsider, the new, somebody who's offering something new and different, Obama, Bill Clinton, they've won. And I think,
but what is,
I agree with Kennedy. I think
their
there is
best
a move
shot
for
of getting
change.
it is the more moderate candidate, though, isn't it?
Well, we don't. I mean, that's not. Again, that's what everybody said in 2016 about the Republicans, right? There's no way Donald Trump could possibly win the election.
Right,
the Democrats were rubbing their hands in glee at the prospect. They were thinking maybe if Jeb would get it. They were scared of Jeb. They thought Trump was going to be a walkover for them. Trump wasn't. Trump was the more, if you like, extreme, the more outsider, the more unusual candidate, and he won. And I think I agree with Kennedy. I think the same applies.
Well,
this
I'm
time
just
around.
thinking about for Democrats, they generally have done well. Now, Barack Obama was certainly a left of center, but he wasn't crazy left of center, right?
Right. I mean, generally speaking, yes. This is a very temperate move. This is a very moderate move.
Right.
This isn't a very exciting move. This is what's very much expected, I think, of what the Democrats usually do. It's somewhat, I don't want to use this term, but it's somewhat of a coronation. It seems like they've already decided who the candidate's going to be, and no matter what, that's what's going to happen. The events of the last 48 hours with Klobuchar and Mayor Pete dropping out, coming by his side, everybody lining up together, it's very typical of the way that the Democrats behave.
Well, Republicans as well. If you look at Bob Dole and John McCain and our recent memory, and even Mitt Romney, they were the next one in line. They were the one in line, so they got the shot. But George W. Bush, he wasn't necessarily the one in line, but he was the one who brought the entire party together.
Well, one other quick thing I'd say is we shouldn't completely write Bernie Sanders off yet. I mean, again, come back to that earlier. He could win. Again, these western states are coming in late. He's won Utah, he's won Colorado, he may well win Texas, and he's almost certain to win California. So it's going to be pretty close in terms of delegates at the end of the night. Sanders may even end up with a lead in terms of delegates. And then the other thing to say is there's several more months of this campaign probably to go. We just saw Joe Biden there give a speech where he started off his speech where he got his wife and his sister confused. He's going to.
I do that all the time.
There's going to be.
Interesting
But you're not running for president, as far as we know, and you're not going to have to give 2,000 speeches in the next 2 months. Biden is still a vulnerable candidate.
All right, I want to bring Ed Rendell into all of this, the former DNC chair, very, very early supporter, and it wasn't like a lot of these other guys who were sort of separating themselves from Joe Biden. He hung in there. Governor, very good to have you. Is this real, what we're watching? I mean, I noticed the party coalesced around Joe Biden after South Carolina, but this is stunning. What do you make of it?
Well, what makes me convinced it's real, Neil, is Massachusetts, Minnesota, for sure.
Yeah.
Those are northern states. They're not southern states. They're not particularly heavy in African American population and the voting demographic, and yet Joe Biden won them both. He won Oklahoma, a very important state to win for someone who has to appeal to conservative northern and western states. He won almost all over the map. I never thought he'd win Massachusetts. With Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders being a senator from Massachusetts and a senator from next door, Vermont.
Well, those two could have canceled each other out, right, and opened up a way for him. But you're right, he won. But you know what? We have you, Governor. The president is tweeting on this. You might be surprised. Said the biggest loser tonight by far is Mini Mike Bloomberg. His political consultants took him for a ride. $700 million washed down the drain, and he got nothing for it but the nickname Mini Mike and the complete destruction of his reputation. Way to go, Mike. What did you think of that?
Well, look, Mike Bloomberg didn't do as well as he hoped he would do. No question about that. But understand this. Mike Bloomberg's reputation exists as being probably the most successful businessman in America by being a fabulous mayor of New York City. He didn't need to burnish his reputation. He did this because he believed that Donald Trump had to be replaced. And you will hear from Mike Bloomberg down the road in the campaign.
Do you think he should quit, Governor? Some people are saying that's it. We wrap it up.
I think if he doesn't do unexpectedly well in California, he should probably think about getting out and supporting Joe Biden. But again, that's his call.
Right.
He has the right to do it. He's talked about positive things. He's talked about things that he'd like to do. I think he's a plus, and he is serious. He would support Bernie Sanders in every way he could if Bernie Sanders would accept his support. So I have strong feelings towards Mike Bloomberg. I think he's a good guy. He's given a ton of money to charity, and he's helped Democrats all over the country.
All right.
He eats pizza like a slob, Neil.
Yeah, there is
can't
that.
endorse that.
Yeah, you can't do the whole pizza
Sorry.
thing, Governor. That's a problem.
Wait a second. Have you ever seen Donald Trump eat?
Well, we're not going to go into the eating thing. I'm sorry that even Kennedy mentioned it. But let me ask you.
Don't attack my friend for bad eating.
Lick your fingers and eat a half a piece of pizza during a corona scare.
Yeah,
that is not presidential.
Bad news. But, let me ask you, though. It's a hypothetical, I grant you, Governor, but let's say you get to Milwaukee, the convention site, and Joe Biden has the most delegates. He has a plurality of the delegates, but he doesn't have them all. In other words, he doesn't have the majority. Should he get the nomination?
Well, I think it's at that point, the rules of the party say it goes to a second ballot. The superdelegates can vote on the second ballot. I don't think necessarily the person with the most delegates going in should be the nominee.
Whether
Because
it's Joe Biden or whether it's Bernie Sanders, you either have that 19 under 91 or you don't, right?
Either way, because, look, let's assume the person who has the most delegates lost the last 6 primaries in a row.
Right.
Well, that shows the person is losing steam, and you might not want to go with that person in the general election.
Well, that was Bill Clinton in 1992, losing the last string of primaries to, Governor Brown.
Right, but there wasn't anybody's... But Governor Brown wasn't a serious candidate for the presidency.
No, he won 6 primaries.
I think it should be left. And remember, Bernie Sanders in 2016 said he didn't think the person with the most delegates going in should automatically
So bottom
get
line,
the
it's
nomination.
1991 or bust. If you don't do it on the first ballot, do it on the second ballot. But you're the same math that the Biden folks had held to Bernie Sanders, they should hold to themselves, right? If he has the most, it's not cutting
Yeah, I
it, right?
agree.
All right, fair enough.
Now, Neil, let me ask you and the panel a question. When's the last convention second ballot? Republican or Democrat? What year? When's the last time we went to a second ballot?
1968.
Was it the Republicans?
1924.
Was it
52?
Republicans in
The
70?
50
Did the Republicans
wrong
go
year.
in 76?
They never went to additional
First
ballot.
ballot.
No, didn't it?
You're not talking about the Republicans
last
one with
second
Abraham
ballot.
Lincoln.
Last second ballot.
The last second ballot was in 1956 when Adlai Stevenson threw the selection of the vice president to the convention. Jack
That
Kennedy
was a
lost
vice
in the third
president
ballot
thing, and
test
that
to
was
Steve
not. That
Bannon.
was a trick question. It was not for the president. It was the vice president. All right. Whatever. All right, we'll let you get away with that because you're using creative math here. But seriously, Governor, congratulations. And whether he eats pizza correctly or not, we'll see what Michael Bloomberg does with your recommendation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Well, good night for Joe Biden. Good night.
Indeed, a very good night to American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp on all of this. Matt, we're told that Joe Biden was probably the president's biggest source of concern. You know the president very, very well. You heard what he has said about Michael Bloomberg tonight. Not a good night for Mini Mike. He's gone on to say the same about Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren. Other than Mini Mike, he says the loser of the night. What do you think if Joe Biden emerges as the nominee here?
Well, look, I think it's our views of the candidates before they start acting like a candidate. And Joe Biden, Lunch Bucket Joe from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who can really appeal to blue-collar voters, I think was something that concerned Republicans. And then he announced, and then he's been acting as a candidate. I'll tell you, he had a good night tonight so far, and he seemed to pull it together since South Carolina. But overall, I mean, this is a faux pas-a-thon, and I do think there's a lot of Republicans like myself who were more worried about Joe Biden, but as he has campaigned, I don't know. I think Bernie Sanders actually brings a lot of energy, consistency, and enthusiasm to the Democratic ticket, and I don't think he's out of this. But Joe Biden, he confused his wife and his sister. It's Super Thursday, Neil. It just never ends.
You know, you could say in another way that he is the Democrats' Donald Trump. I don't mean to disparage the president, but as a candidate, he had some slip-ups, faux pas, a lot worse. And voters stuck with him. The only thing, Democratic voters, warts and all, misstatements and all, you know, Professor Irwin Corey moments and all, maybe you and I are the only guys who can appreciate that reference. He still is well thought of by Democratic voters. So in a way, does he have the Trump effect going for him?
Look, I don't think so. I don't think there's any comparison between a guy who's been an elected representative since I think he was 28 years old, and he's now you know, almost 80. I don't think there's any comparison between that and the first-time candidate who captures the presidency. It's true that Donald Trump didn't know a lot about the intricacies of government, and I assume that's what you mean by he made errors in terms of how the government works, and he made errors in his first couple
I'm talking
years.
about he made a lot of big mistakes. And I'm
just saying, with Joe Biden,
and yet he got elected, is what I'm saying. And I'm not meaning to disparage him, but to say that when Republicans pile on Joe Biden, maybe for all the obvious reasons, maybe some of them should look in the mirror at the candidate who sits in the White House now.
Right. Well, I guess what I would say is this, which is Donald Trump captured a spirit, certainly in the Republican Party.
You're absolutely right.
That we kept nominating the guys who looked like they should be president. They acted like they should be president. But we were fearful that when they actually got the brass ring and got the nomination, they started backing away from pretty core principles. Donald Trump saw that there was a huge gap between what the base of the party wanted, who are the heart and soul of the party, and what was happening. And he stepped into that gap and said, I can do that. I can deliver on these things. I think the comparison is with Mike Bloomberg, another billionaire. The only difference is Bloomberg thought, my gosh, if Trump can do this thing, I can do this thing. And Michael Bloomberg has just demonstrated to everybody, number one, you can't buy it, and it's a lot harder than it looks.
Indeed, you're right about that. It's a lot harder than it looks, and surprising things happen during the course of a race. Thank you, Mr. Slop. Always good. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
You know, he kind of echoed the point you did, Jared, a little bit earlier, that the so-called those who come out of central casting for the job or seem to fit all the, you know, the boxes, check off all the boxes, they don't necessarily get the prize.
Right. It does look like what the Democrats are doing is what many people wanted the Republicans to do in 2016, the establishment unifying around a candidate. You know, they never would, you know, Rubio and Cruz and Jeb and Kasich would never kind of pull out in the way that Buttigieg and Klobuchar did. It looks like the establishment are rallying around the candidate that they think is the best chance to beat the insurgent, if you like, in the form of Donald Trump in 16 and now Bernie Sanders in 20. But again, back to what Kennedy said and what Matt said, there is an outsider quality that is very appealing to voters. Yeah. And I think saying, actually, you know what we really need right now is we need someone who's been a fixture of Washington for 50 years, who has, in that time, let's be really honest, and Trump will go after him for this, been wrong, as Bob Gates famously said, on pretty well every single important foreign policy issue that he's faced, from the Cold War to the first Iraq War to arguably the second Iraq War to the killing of Osama bin Laden. There's a long...
You can go back to the Civil War.
Yeah, exactly.
He was wrong about that.
There's a long track record there with Biden of policies that many people think have got this country into the kind of mess that it's been in.
And that would come out in a general election.
What Bernie Sanders was talking about: trade, voting for trade agreements, voting for you know, immigration, pretty well open borders immigration. It's not a very strong.
And if you try and backtrack on that, you're a total hypocrite. And that's Joe Biden's. That could be his biggest problem, because if you try and reverse yourself on those positions, people don't like hypocrisy. That's why Kamala Harris is out of the race. That's why Elizabeth Warren dropped so much, because they have these big proposals and they were having to essentially reverse themselves, and Elizabeth Warren wouldn't really say how she was going to pay for something and had to lie about it.
The thing that has me so confused, I'm scratching my head a little bit, because I feel like support for Biden isn't strong. Over 50% of voters made their minds up the last minute. We've got extreme support, enthusiastic support for Sanders, and yet when you look at voter turnout, it is at record highs. When you look in Virginia, it's at over 1.1 million turnout with 91% reporting. In 2008, when you had Barack Obama running, it was at 900,000. We have a lot more people going out to vote. So what that suggests to me is there is more enthusiasm than we're counting for. And is that enthusiasm just that it's anti-Trump, that we have to get him out of office, and that's going to be enough? Because usually that's not enough to get somebody elected. We don't vote against, we vote for.
I mean, that's been Joe Biden's entire platform, as he said, I'm the guy who can beat Trump.
Well, that's been all of
theirs. He doesn't really have these massive policy proposals that you can put your finger on. He's just said, like, I can unseat
anything can
this
change.
guy.
You know?
Yes.
Anything can change. By the way, we were mentioning what's going on in the race now and all these other, some interesting news in California, that voting centers are going to remain open for those who got in line, particularly around LA, before 8 p.m. But voter turnout is so heavy there that apparently the Bernie Sanders folks have been urging, if they're on that line, they must vote. And apparently the LA County voting authorities are agreeing. You're on the line, you're voting.
The other quick thing to say, sorry, about California is that there are a lot of mail-in ballots. You were allowed to mail in your ballot as late
mail
as
it in
today.
As long as you wouldn't know for a few days.
However, it has to be received by
3 days.
It has to be received by Friday. So we could not know the California. We won't know the actual California numbers.
Well, you're not saying we'd be here until Friday.
I'm game if you are.
They do that intentionally as not to disenfranchise voters.
Where is the catering?
The unaffiliated in California can vote for Democrats. GOP has a closed primary.
All right, very, very interesting, I guess. I'm kidding. California, 450 delegates at stake. Polls close there in 10 minutes. But again, as I just told you here, in the LA County area, it could go on much past that. And then the mail-in ballots that we were talking about here, and there are a good many of them. And keep in mind, 40% of Californians have already voted, right? They've already voted. And that was before the South Carolina primary that turned everything around for Joe Biden. In fact, think of that in all of these states where there's a lot of early voting. Texas, I think it was up to 45% early voting. The numbers that Joe Biden is stacking up right now are coming even with the reality that it was pre his comeback win or big win in South Carolina. Now, that leaves you to judge either that Bernie Sanders didn't get nearly as many votes as people thought he would in that early voting, or he's more than making up for that is Joe Biden with the voting that's happening now in real time. Either way, it is a fascinating evening, and for the former vice president, one that is seeing his success in waves that he has never experienced in 3 different bids for the highest office in the land. More after this. All right, there's a reason why they call it Super Tuesday. Not only just the states involved, 14 of them, but the delegates involved, about 2/3 of what you need to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. Just a couple of minutes away now from polls closing, and the biggest enchilada of them all, California, the Golden State, where we have about 4 to 15 delegates up for grabs. Remember, in some polling stations in LA County, they're keeping those polls open a little longer to allow people who flooded them. If they're online, they can go ahead and vote. They always act like that's a big. I thought that was standard procedure to do that. If you're online,
California always has to act special.
Really?
It's the Newsom effect.
It is.
It's
I
annoying.
understand. All right, to the Hill editor-in-chief.
Homeless people have to get those provisional ballots.
Understood. Something like that. Bob Cusack with us right now. Bob, it's shaping up to be quite a night here, certainly for Joe Biden, when you consider that a little more than 72 hours ago, he had not won a single primary or caucus in 3 separate presidential bids going some 30 years. What do you make of what he has amassed tonight?
Neil, I mean, this is unbelievable. I was thinking going into tonight that if Joe Biden basically fought to a draw, that would be a win because he would still be in this race. And he has effectively knocked Sanders down, not out. Sanders came into the night as a front runner, and you can make the argument that Biden is now. Certainly, we've got a long way to go. And remember, next week, Michigan, Washington State, big states that Sanders won 4 years ago. But this is just a stunning, stunning night for Joe Biden.
You know, you're right to allude to March 10th. Of course, we had 352 delegates at stake in Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Washington State. So a lot up for grabs then. Right after that, of course, we have March 17th, Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Ohio. So to your point, a long way from done. But if you think about this contest and how these two could draw roughly even, especially if someone like Elizabeth Sanders stays in the race and siphon some of that Sanders support along, we could see Sanders and Biden arrive in Wisconsin effectively split, right?
Yes, and certainly Biden. I mean, I think that Bloomberg is probably not going to be in this race for much longer. Rough night for him. Warren, I don't know. I'm not sure what she's going to do. Obviously, she has the policies that are similar to Bernie Sanders, but she's gotten into this fight with him on the campaign trail, and they have clashed. So where she goes is one to watch. But yeah, I mean, she could stay in for a while. She has some money to do it.
And, you know, she has a vested interest on the part of those who are no fans of hers but want to see Joe Biden win to stay in the race, right? Because she siphons from him, right?
Yes, the pressure will be on Bloomberg from the Biden supporters and the establishment in Washington that likes Biden. I mean, the moderate Democrats who just got to Congress when they won the House, they are breathing a sigh of relief. But there's not going to be pressure from the Biden supporters to get Warren out because, as you say, that she takes away votes from him. So I think the most interesting decision is what Warren does over the next 2 weeks to a month.
Do you think there's going to be a brokered convention?
I think after tonight, I think it's probably 60% that it won't go because I think Biden has the momentum. But, you know, listen, I mean, this is politics. Joe Biden is going to have to, he's not a great debater. He's probably going to have to go one-on-one in a debate later this month with Bernie Sanders. And Bernie's going to be on the attack like never before.
Lee, how would that go, a debate between those two, focused on those two?
That would be fun.
Yeah? That's a pay-per-view. That's
It would be like
popcorn
you'd have two very angry men yelling at each other is what you'd end up with. And I don't know how well
Biden yells more, though. He just seems to yell a lot.
Bernie just talks in monotone like this. This is the only tone
That's
he
actually
uses.
pretty good.
So if these two are on the stage together and it's just them,
You know,
it's going to be
that's
like,
very good, Kennedy.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Neil Patrick.
No, thank
Caputo.
you.
However, it's going to be like WWE meets Cocoon. It's going to be kinky, it's going to be dirty, and it's going to be very silky.
You're going down, brother. You're going down. How do you think it goes?
I mean, it's going to be extraordinary, but I do think two quick things out of tonight.
You're the last person to go with the wrestling analogy.
Biden's going to get a huge Biden's going to get a huge influx of money after tonight.
Yes. Absolutely.
Partly because he's done so well, partly because Bloomberg is basically going to be out, and all those Wall Street crowd who've been backing Bloomberg are now going to actually come and support Biden. He's got a lot of money. Second point is, one very worrying thing for Sanders is he's done a lot worse tonight than he did in 2016 in several key states. Minnesota in particular, some of those southern states, he's really done very poorly.
And the young turnout is what it needs to be.
Now as California comes in, we can say the biggest prize of the night is going to go to Bernie Sanders. California, he picks up. Yes, he wins California.
What a bunch of commies.
All right,
Come
no,
on, man.
That's
not a surprise, but it's a surprise that we're calling it already. We didn't expect to be able to call this. This is literally.
I love our methodology. And we can have 3 votes and say, based on these 3 votes.
Blindfolded guys throwing spaghetti at the
I can already hear our decision desk now is already saying, no, you know, Neil, there's a strategy to this. It's not 3 voters, it's 6 voters. No, I'm kidding. But the fact of the matter is this is the biggest prize of the night, and it goes to Bernie Sanders. Now, we don't know how it washes out with the other candidates. Remember, it's proportional voting. And Lee, to that point, that's what you need to look at, right?
You realize all those voters standing in line waiting to vote now just turn around and went home.
Well, I don't know, or they had them all you know, they're just factored into these final figures, right?
It's really important that they stay in line because it's 415 electoral college votes. That's a big number. When you think they need a total of 1,991, that's a big percentage. 25% of delegates. I'm sorry, of what they need to go into the convention. So. Every vote here counts, and it's a really, really important thing. So as much as we're talking about what a big night this is for Biden, this is a big win for Bernie Sanders.
That's a huge deal. 20% of the night just went
It is. Now, how much of that is apportioned to the senator, we don't know. But Edward Lawrence at Bernie Sanders' headquarters, that's one you want, and that's the big one. Again, we don't know how it breaks down, but let's say hypothetically, you know, these two, by and large, because it's not just them, but they split the night, and the 1,357 delegates. That means you have 2 guys running around here with, you know, potentially 600, 700 delegates each. That's a pretty interesting split. What do you think, Edward Lawrence?
Very interesting split here, and that California could be the state that pushes Senator Bernie Sanders above Joe Biden again on the end of this Super Tuesday. So that's a very big get for him, and that's something that they really wanted in this room. This room looks very different from when you last saw it about 30 minutes ago. There was a frenzy going on here inside this. The tone was deafening inside this room from the thousands of people that were here from the moment that Senator Bernie Sanders took the stage. In his speech, he talked about the movement he was creating where he could beat President Donald Trump. Listen. And you heard the crowd there literally deafening. Now, Senator Sanders never mentioned by name former Vice President Joe Biden or Michael Bloomberg, but he did say in the speech that you cannot buy an election. He also said that the same old politics will not beat President Donald Trump in this, the crowd just very young, very enthusiastic. And again, the senator seemed to feed off that enthusiasm, which is something he says he needs in order to keep going, to get the momentum to win this nomination. Back to you, Neil.
All right, thank you, my friend, very, very much. Just tabulating it now, 4 states for Bernie Sanders as things stand now, with California and Utah and Colorado and Vermont. For Joe Biden, Virginia, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Minnesota. So 8 states for Joe Biden. 4 right now for Bernie Sanders. We are still waiting to hear on Texas and Maine. We've been keeping a peek at Texas right now because this is a remarkable one. If Sanders were to pick up Texas, he'd have the 2 biggest prizes in the end of the night, and that would be, of course, California and this one. Of course, it's all apportionment voting here, and that one is fairly close. In Maine, literally too close to call right now, where the the former Vice President Bernie Sanders, are almost split dead even at roughly 33.6 to 34%. Jonathan Hunt at Joe Biden headquarters on all these developments. They probably would have liked California. They would very much salivate at the prospect of Texas. But again, no matter how you slice it, a surprisingly strong night for Joe Biden, even if he loses those last few, right?
Yeah, Neil, absolutely it is. And I think it will be no surprise to anybody that Bernie Sanders is going to win California. The margin of victory is really what matters here because, as you rightly point out, it is a proportional allocation of delegates. So the percentages will be absolutely critical. Earlier this evening, the Biden team had said they were cautiously optimistic about California, but that cautious optimism really always focused on a strong second place rather than winning it, given the huge advantages that Senator Sanders has had in terms of his ground game here in California and the number of appearances he has made in the state. But we just heard a short time ago from a very fired up former vice president saying that just a few days ago everybody was declaring his campaign dead, and then he said, tell that to the people of Alabama, tell that to the people of Tennessee, tell that to the people of North Carolina, and so on. And he went on to say that he is a man who can defeat President Trump. He said we need a man we need a nominee who can defeat the president. And he also said quite pointedly, we need a nominee who is a Democrat, a very pointed reference, obviously, to Senator Sanders. But the Biden team very happy so far with how the night has gone. They'll be looking very closely at the allocation of delegates here in California, and they still hope, Neil, that they could yet pull out a victory in Texas. We shall see. Neil?
All right, Jonathan, thank you very, very much. You know, California is always a safely Democratic state. You're talking about who ultimately wins it in the contest. Texas, the second biggest, draw for delegates tonight. No matter which way it goes, it's always considered safe Republican territory, although that is increasingly in doubt of late, given some of the inroads that Democrats have made in that state. Lee Carter, when you're looking at all of this and how it sorts out, it looks like even if Bernie Sanders then takes Texas to add to his haul, potentially Maine, we're talking a draw, essentially.
That's right. Now,
we don't know how it's all portioned out, but to the draw goes the surprise for Joe Biden, right? I mean, he is now stalling the momentum of a guy still putting in a very good night, but it's not the sweep that little more than 72 hours ago looked like a given.
That's right. Because of the proportional delegates, this isn't going to be a huge sweep. Especially when you're looking at a split in California with some of the exit polls, it looks like it might get split 3 ways, not just 2 ways.
Right.
When that happens, it's not going to be the huge numbers that we were talking about earlier. And so it had to have been a decisive victory for him to get the numbers that he needed in order for us to say that Bernie is really a force to be contended with. Now, Biden is obviously having a very big night, but we haven't looked at his proportions either in the states that he's won. So this still is going to be a little bit of math that we're going to have to do to figure out where does this all shake out.
And California, critical thing to watch there is how well, obviously, Bloomberg and Warren do. The exit poll seems to have Bernie up about 15 points over Biden. Big win there, with maybe Elizabeth Warren being viable at 15%, but not Bloomberg. Bernie will be desperately hoping that neither of those two ends up viable, because then obviously his share of the vote will be his share of the delegates will be that much larger among those two. Whereas if Warren
so if you don't get 15% of it, you get
So you've got to get 50%
nothing.
statewide, and you also 50%, they do it by congressional district there too. So there will be some other delegates, but if Warren is able to get 15% statewide, and that's roughly where the exit poll, I think, has her, then she will take a lot of delegates away that would otherwise have mostly gone to Bernie.
So you could have, though, if she gets that, and let's say Michael Bloomberg gets that, that's 40 to 45 delegates each for them, if not more. And then depending on how close the former vice president is, they're splitting maybe 300 delegates, right?
That's right.
Yeah. It looks likely that Sanders and Biden are going to come out very, very close tonight.
That's what I'm thinking,
It's
right?
going to be pretty well a tie. I mean, we don't quite know.
No, I know what you're saying.
But as it looks right now, it could well be more or less.
Yeah, I'm just doing the math in my head. I mean, I see what you're saying about the congressional district, but if I'm thinking the delegates, 420 delegates, and you get 15% of them, and someone else gets 15%, you can make the case that it does keep this race going on longer.
Well, it not only that, but it also raises the probability that there is going to be a brokered convention. Because, which of these two men who are most likely to remain standing are going to give up the mantle at this point? They're not. They are not only fighting for the presidency, they're fighting for the soul of the Democrat Party. And Bernie Sanders is fighting to reshape our entire political system. So his supporters have much more invested in this race than they did even in 2016 when he was considered a long shot. And nothing is going to keep him out of this. But, when you talk about people who dropped out, I still don't understand if Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar were given the carrot or the stick. And a lot of people say, oh, they were promised big things. Well, I don't think either of them were promised the vice presidency if Joe Biden is, in fact, the nominee. And I think...
Do you accept at face value that maybe they thought for their longer-term careers?
Absolutely not. No way, not before Super Tuesday. If you think you're going to run the free world, you think you are the most powerful and important person on the planet, and nothing is going to keep you from that pursuit, especially.
So you'd at least see how the heck you would do, right?
I don't know about that. I think for Mayor Pete, it was a pretty easy call, actually, because he was clearly not going to do very well in Super. The polling, he was very, very low on Super Tuesday.
But why not take your chance?
Because he can gain a lot of credit with Joe Biden, the man who may well be the nominee. He's actually thrown his support at a critical moment because it certainly helped.
It carries more weight, sort of like the way Chris Christie did, showing his support for Trump.
I think it was a kind of calculated move on Buttigieg's part, which may well pay off.
What do you think?
I think it was. I think that it was the right move for Mayor Pete at the time because I think it's in his brand to say that he's going to do the right thing. He's all about responsibility.
But Kennedy seems to be... I don't want to put words in your mouth, that there was a push.
No, of course. There is some level of force here.
Yeah.
And even if they're saying, don't worry about Joe, he's not really running things. We're running things. We're the people behind the curtain. And, who knows who those people are?
I see.
Maybe it's Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer going,
something not right about you, but I can't. No. Guys, have you ever thought, though, if it was winner take all, like I guess the Republicans have, who would be... Well, Sanders would be doing very well.
He'd be doing very well right now.
Yeah, because he'd get the California,
if he were to take Texas
as well, he'd end up with a clear majority of the delegates on the night.
And the irony of this proportional voting was born of the last contest, right? Because Sanders felt that it wasn't reflective of his strength.
Right.
That's right.
And now it's hurting him.
Right. As is, by the way, now, as the
whole
rules about the
convention
too.
Let's not forget there's still a lot to go, right? And Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are going to be in it for the long haul. Right. If Elizabeth Warren does drop out
now, saying that Bloomberg is not.
I don't think that he is, and I think that if Elizabeth...
And to that point, by the way, Charlie Gasparin is reporting that Bloomberg is possibly cutting back on ad buys, suggesting he's either dialing it back or weakening.
Listen, when the conversation about Bloomberg going in, very much the rumor was if there was no path for Biden or a moderate to get there, he was going to jump in. And it was looking like there was no path for Biden or a moderate. Now there's a path for Biden or a moderate, and I wouldn't be surprised if he said, you know what, I'm out. I'm going to put my support behind Biden, and all of my ad spending that I want to do against Donald Trump, I'll continue to do against Donald Trump.
$170 million in Super Tuesday seats. That's what
Mike
Bloomberg
is that right?
That's what he's spent so far. are, but it also disproves the axiom that the more money you spend, the more votes you buy. That has not happened tonight. That didn't happen, well, it kind of did with Hillary Clinton because she did win the popular vote in 2016, but it certainly, she outspent Donald Trump 2-1.
But
that
he's
did
going
not
to
win her the
get some
presidency.
delegates tonight.
About 120, 130, I think it looks like at the moment.
Horseshoes
something like
and hand
that.
grenades.
You know, it's but again, the other problem for him was that it was going to be. I mean, his whole strategy was that brokered convention, nobody would have a clear lead, and they'd come to him. Well, if he's only going to have 130, 150 delegates out of 4,000, then it's very unlikely they're going to turn to him. And
Although those two, Sanders and Biden, could cancel each other out, right?
They could, but they're going to have between them a really sizable proportion of
We have
delegates.
to look at who the superdelegates are who are going to vote on that second ballot.
There
And
were
Mike
over
Bloomberg-
700 of those, right?
Yes, but Mike Bloomberg has been trying to buy their support. That's all he knows how to do. He's buying everyone a pony. And so he's promising all these people because he's
Now, there are people listening to the show right now saying, why is he buying everyone a
more
pony?
endorsements
Right.
in the House than anyone. That's because people in the House run for office constantly. Every 2 years they have to, and so they need Mike Bloomberg's money, and that's why these sellouts have already pledged their support to him. Disgusting.
Not even.
We're going to take a break here. We are awaiting these calls on Maine and Texas. They're the only two outstanding states right now. We just don't know which way they will tip. Let's take a quick look at how futures are doing right now. This might or might not have anything to do with what's happening here, but a 301-point advance of the Dow Jones Industrial, the futures there. The Nasdaq, of course, they had a horrific day today, even with a half-point cut in interest rates that some deemed to be a sign that nothing is going to trade, investors' minds that this whole virus situation is escalating into a global crisis. Now, some are going to pounce on this and saying, well, Joe Biden as a potential nominee, that we can live with if it ever means that he makes it to the White House. Others could flip that around and say this means suddenly Joe Biden emerges as a legitimate threat to the incumbent in the White House, and that might not be so favorably seen. We'll see. On the day, you're looking at the point drop in the Dow itself. The futures are what's up. Asian markets largely up, though not a lot. We're following all of that and the fallout tomorrow morning when trading resumes based on what we've seen thus far. A surprisingly tight contest among Democrats to see who will get a chance to take on Donald J. Trump. More to this. Welcome back. You know, Texas closed at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, so a little bit more than 2 hours ago. And Maine, technically at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, so a little bit more than 3 hours ago. And those states are the ones we are waiting to hear from, and we're not hearing yet. There's no way we can make a decision on. They're that close and that evenly divided. Dinder Bolton has been looking particularly at Texas right now and some specific counties that are making it as difficult as it is to finally get a sense of who won.
That is exactly right, Neil. So we're going to call up the graphics here, and you can see essentially I'm going to take you right to where Austin is, which is in the heart of Travis County. So we know this is kind of a mini Silicon Valley. You have IBM, you have Dell, you have Apple. All of these companies have significant presences there, and you can see it's pretty progressive, not surprisingly leaning hard towards Sanders there. If we take you back out and kind of come all the way over here and start to look at some of these areas, Beaumont, for example, in Jefferson County, you have this kind of energy industry, which is really important here. More blue collar, and not surprisingly, if you like, that is going towards Biden. You can see that. Going all the way over west, El Paso, you have Congressman Beto O'Rourke, and of course he endorsed Joe Biden. So we'll see how that settles right now, leaning hard towards Sanders. But one thing I want to notice, you do see Bloomberg's name up here, his photo. And interestingly enough, Bloomberg, Neil, had 19 offices set up in Texas. Joe Biden, only 4. So as far as bang for the buck, we know that Biden has really been leaning on congressional support. So far, it seems to be working for him, and Bloomberg spent an awful lot of money in numerous states and probably not getting the results that he would like to see.
But still, if he stays over 15%, now it's 7.4%, he's going to get something out of it,
yeah,
right? So
true
it's
enough.
not a total
19 offices worth something.
Yeah, 19 offices, yeah. Maybe the 19 delegates. Thank you very, very much. Let's go to RNC Deputy Communications Director Cassie Smedley. Cassie, thank you for joining us. What do you make of what you're watching on the Democratic side?
Well, I think the choice is going to be between a Democrat socialist or the candidate who's embraced all of the Democrat socialist policies. So either way you shake it, we think we've got a great record of results from President Trump, and that's going to be a great choice for the American people to make come November, and we feel confident it will be a victorious night for President Trump and Republicans.
I always have gotten the feeling that the president's biggest worry was Joe Biden. You know, disavow me of those remarks. What do you think?
Well, there's nothing that shows that Joe Biden has somehow become a good, strong candidate. Setting aside even all of the gaffes, one of which we just saw him make in his remarks tonight, he's never gotten more than 1% of the vote. The president's been very vocal about that. And there doesn't seem to be
sure
any
the president would have to look at what's happened over the last 72 hours, or he's made up for a little lost time, right?
But I think what you're seeing is you've got Democrats who are saying, well, who can we stomach? We've got the socialists that we don't want. And yeah, we've never really liked Joe Biden and never wanted Joe Biden and don't really think that he's our best possible option, but he's the one we got. So in terms of what we're seeing, I mean, just tonight, the president continues to have a good night. He's doubling and tripling vote totals that he got in 2016 in many of these states. But also, as you look down the ballot, Republicans are united. And so for our purposes and what we're doing at the RNC, we're not just looking at re-electing President Trump, but we're looking at how can we get the strongest possible ballot of Republicans to make sure he's got good people in Washington to help him usher in more policies. Conversely, with the Democrats, they're in a heap of trouble if they've got really either one of these guys at the top of the ticket, because that's going to force all of these other candidates down the ballot to say, are you with the socialists? Do you support the socialist policies?
Well, if it's Joe Biden,
have.
and in battleground states he polls as well as he does. We just don't know. You're right. I do want to expand it out to my colleagues here, Jared Baker, the Wall Street Journal report, so much more on what he makes of all of this. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, again, a lot's going to come down to California, and if the exit poll is right, Bernie Sanders and Bloomberg doesn't get any delegates, which he may not, or gets a handful of delegates, and Bernie Sanders wins quite heavily, he could end up netting something like 90 delegates over Joe Biden in California alone. That, by my calculation, just very quickly, is roughly equivalent to the total net delegates that Biden is going to win in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama combined. So, you know, while we've all been focusing so heavily in the early part of the night on these eastern states and southern states in particular where Biden has done very well, Bernie could come in with a big win in California, the biggest prize of the lot, and actually win a very sizable share of the delegates there, which will put him still at least, you know, everybody's kind of seems to be writing him off tonight, will make him still at least competitive and may actually end up with Bernie still being ahead in the delegate count after tonight.
What do you think of that, Lee?
I think that it's going to be really interesting because if it does turn out to be that competitive, then we're going to have a continued where we're going to have to, everybody's going to have to sort of absorb the new Joe Biden. Is he the new Joe Biden? Is he the old Joe Biden? Joe Biden's going to have to make his case, and he's going to have to be a strong candidate. And
but Cassie's right about this much. He's not been a very compelling candidate.
He's not been a very compelling candidate. So he's going to have to do something different than he's done so far. And it can't be just leaning on congressional districts. It can't just be leaning on endorsements. He's going to have to get people excited. Now, Bernie can start making the case that the establishment is rigged against him. He can start getting people really, really excited and rally his base. And as we go into some of these other states, then he might see the kind of turnout that he was going to need to win. Because what we're seeing right now is that the young people turnout tonight, and some of the things that I've seen so far in exit polling, isn't exactly what I think Bernie Sanders had hoped it was going to be. I think that could change if he starts getting people really excited and get their blood pressure elevated to think that this is a system that's rigged against them.
They want to win. It's all about wanting to win, right, Kennedy? And they think that Joe Biden is their best shot at that. And we've all gotten to this argument that sometimes it's not what you think, but it's clear the party is rallied around Joe Biden to do that.
Yes, he said himself the other night, essentially, that he's their last best hope. And at this point, he is, because they're fighting to maintain the status quo. And it's really one of the last elections they will be able to do that before you see a massive generational shift. It's not surprising the younger voters are going for Bernie Sanders because there is a full-blown indoctrination in the socialist vein in colleges and universities in this country, and that's just the way it is. That's not being a get off my lawn cranky old lady.
Right.
That's just, if you know, I went to college late. I went to college in my 30s and graduated in 2005, and in my math classes they were talking about Marx. And I don't think there's a place for that in an algebra class. I digress. But Bernie Sanders is not a guy. Bernie Sanders is an ideology. Joe Biden is a man. And the Democrats have to decide if they're going to invest in a nice guy or in someone who wants to completely turn over the apple cart.
I was going to say, when I went to college, Karl Marx was a graduate student, so I...
Don't do that when I'm drinking my tea.
All right, there we go. We have Ben Stein weighing in on all of this. That is their rare comedic, economic, and political mind. His take on a race that's still too close to call in Texas, still too close to call in Maine, but no longer too close to call in his state of California. That has gone for Bernie Sanders after this. All right, it's been a tale of two very different sort of political nights here. The early night dominated by Joe Biden, the former vice president, who was just stacking up one primary win after another, a total of 8 thus far tonight. Bernie Sanders, for the longest time, was just sort of clinging to Vermont and Colorado as his only victories. Then he added Utah, and then, of course, just about 15 minutes ago, the biggest prize, actually 30 minutes ago, as soon as polls closed, we were able to conclude that California, the richest prize of the night, was going to Bernie Sanders. Again, we don't know how all of this is going to be sort of portioned out. We do know a guy who has a good read on the state of California. What might have happened is the former Nixon speechwriter, actor, economic genius, the Capitalist Code, author among many, many bestsellers, Ben Stein, his read on the evening. Ben, I guess the shock isn't so much that Bernie Sanders won California, but that he's in the fight of his life across the country suddenly with Joe Biden. What do you make of that?
The fact that this night is happening at all is amazing. The fact that Joe Biden has come along as strong as he has after being mocked and belittled and treated like he was halfway dead and just a zombie in The Walking Dead, and then suddenly comes back as a leader is just amazing. The fact that Sanders, who was a screaming maniac for most of the campaign and who had a heart attack during the campaign, is coming out on top, seems to have more strength than Godzilla, is just truly amazing. The fact that the Democrat Party is turning out to be the Socialist Party and has a very good chance of winning as the American Socialist Party is an astonishing thing. I mean, this electorate has changed monumentally, just monumentally in the last couple of years.
What do you make, though, Ben, of what even Bernie, forget Bernie Sanders, that's impressive enough, but Michael Bloomberg, 19.3% in second right now in California?
I make of it the fact that he's been running a heck of a lot of ads. You can't turn on the TV in this state without seeing ads for him all night long. He seems to have positioned his ads very well to play at times when people are likely voters are watching TV. He's done some very smart media buys, but you can't buy likability. You cannot buy lovability. He's a brilliant guy, I'm sure, but he is just a cold fish. And somehow in California, we don't like cold fish. We like nice warm fish, but we do not like cold fish. We have lots of fish off the shores of California, and we don't need any colder ones than the ones we have.
Well, Bernie Sanders, you know, isn't exactly warm and fuzzy.
He's warm. He's not warm. He's red hot. He's burning up with anger and rage. He's a guy who lives on the fumes of rage from his various past lives. He's a guy who has a lot of anger built up in him from some things that must have happened to him in his childhood.
I think Lee wants to jump on
He's red. He's a communist.
But one of the things that I find fascinating, right, is that, and you're a speechwriter, Sanders is one of the only ones that has a message. The others are all anti-Trump. What are they all about? And it seems that, yes, you're talking about the feelings that people are evoking, but who's going to really tell a story that's going to get the American people excited going into 2020 beyond just winning this sort of death match that's going on between
Well,
these guys.
I think that if Mr. Joe Biden could pull his words together and arrange them in the right way. They are all in the dictionary. They've been in the dictionary for a long time, but nobody has known how to arrange them quite right for a long time. And Bernie has some ability to do that. And even though the words to me don't make any sense, they're just socialist nonsense, to some people they make a lot of sense. And I think one of your guests earlier made a brilliant point, which is that young people in America have been brought up today being indoctrinated to believe that socialism is a good thing, and that's paying off, and the crows are returning to the nest, and they're befouling the nest with their socialist bird poo-poo, and that's what's happening in the election. Bird poo-poo from the socialist teachers.
And you say Joe Biden has an issue with the words. I'm kidding. Kennedy.
No, he's at the, and thank you, Ben. Those were my words, and it's very unfortunate, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people go, huh.
It's kind of tragic that he didn't know who said them, though. You know?
Well, you know, he's listening to my words.
I'm not getting.
He's not looking at my lips.
I'm not getting return back here, so all I can see
you can't hear us at all?
I hear you, but I can't see you. I know what you. I know what you.
Lee and I
All you have to do is
like
worry about hearing us.
Supremes. We're in black dresses.
Right.
We're looking solid. We're feeling it, Ben. And thanks to you and the way you have so cohesively laid out the night. And I think you say so much about California, and California really is frighteningly leading the country in terms of its slide off the leftist cliff.
But also worth noting, it is California's finest hour in terms of politics, because this is the first time California's mattered in a primary election.
Well, there is that. If you move it up to calendar.
From June to Super Tuesday, it's actually going to be, could be almost decisive, actually. So that's, you know, which has interesting implications.
Well, it's definitely escalated. You know, though, Ben, Ronald Reagan was the last Republican to win California, though. When's the next time a Republican?
H.W. Bush?
I think.
Is that right?
I think
George H.W. Bush won in 1988.
Did he?
Yeah, I think he did.
Did he?
Yeah.
Ben, is that true? The last president?
I think he did. I think he did. And we're going to have a Republican who will win again, because the Hispanic vote is inevitably going to turn out to become a Republican vote. They're family-oriented people. They're religious-oriented people. They're
When do you
culturally
think it's going to happen in California, though? If it's the last time was 88, Kennedy, then that's been a while.
I don't know when it's going to happen, but it will happen. This state is not going to stay permanently left-wing. College student, Cal State, Berkeley left-wingers. It's not going to stay like that forever.
No, there's going to be a revolution, and it's going to start in Orange County, and it's going to spread.
Right on. Right on. Power to the people.
By the way, Ben, when I have you, and you're a good read of the economy and all, is a lot of people are looking at what's going on with the coronavirus and the fear gripping the world and the markets and all that stuff. Certainly wouldn't see it in futures activity tonight. Variety of issues to come up there. But is this going to be a problem for President Trump, that, you know, the only thing that could slip things up is if the recovery falters or the markets falter or both falter? But how legitimate a worry is that?
It's a very legitimate worry, because this terrible, terrible thing, really an act of God, as a friend of mine calls it, has happened. And who else are we going to blame for it? God isn't on the ballot. So the only person on the ballot who's in charge of anything is Mr. Trump. So he's going to get blamed for it. And it's a terrible thing. And he better get on the ball and start announcing plans every day, every single day. He's got to become the I have a plan equivalent of Senator Warren, to have a plan every day to do something about this virus.
Are you saying he's not doing that effectively right now?
I don't think he's doing it effectively enough. Otherwise, the market wouldn't have gone down over 700 points today.
Okay, that's a very good point. All right, I'm done with you. Ben, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure for me.
By the way, I feel bad you can't see us, but I, too, am wearing a black dress, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
You're our Diana Ross,
Yeah,
Neil.
thank you very, very much. Isn't he good? I just love Ben. All right, in the meantime, we are still waiting for Maine, still waiting for Texas. I think going into this night, if we predicted this is where we'd be, we wouldn't believe ourselves, but this is where we stand. More to this. And to think we started the night that California would be the one we'd have to wait for between the mail-in ballots and all these delays at polling centers in L.A. County. That one was decided almost from the moment the polls closed. We were able to conclude it was Bernie Sanders comfortably and that Michael Bloomberg would grab second. We did not think, maybe some did, that certainly Texas would drag out, and that is still the case. We simply cannot declare that one way or the other, even with more than half the vote in. Maine, another one, too close to call. But of the 12 remaining primaries up for grabs tonight, 8 have gone for Joe Biden and 4 have gone for Bernie Sanders. It is almost an even split if you look at delegates, likely the way things are portioned out, but not exactly. But for Bernie Sanders, Vermont, Colorado, Utah, and California, the biggest prize of the night for Joe Biden. And we'll be rifling through these, so if you just indulge me, Virginia, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Minnesota. There's going to be a quiz. All right, in the meantime, I want to go to Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell, what he makes of all of this. Gianno, when you look at this, I mean, you could actually, we were saying during the break, you could trace it back to Jim Clyburn, who, when he announced his support for Joe Biden with just, think about it, with a couple of days to spare, it changed everything around. He comfortably picked up the African-American vote in South Carolina. That carried him into this day, this night, where he has now picked up more wins than he has in his prior runs for president combined. It's remarkable.
It is, and you know what? This is the greatest example that polls do not vote. People do. And I got to tell you, African Americans saved a crashing plane and landed it safely on the Hudson River. Because Joe Biden, we know he was a goner for so many different people. I was in South Carolina for the Laura Ingraham show interviewing African Americans and students across college campuses, and folks
there were saying... That's so weird, because I asked you to do the same thing, and you said you were busy. Now I know what you were doing. Go ahead. What was that? Yeah. Kidding.
I would love to do it, Neil.
Sure.
But you know what? I was interviewing these individuals, and this was on Friday, the day before the primary, and many of those individuals said that they were still undecided. Yeah. That wasn't the older African Americans, but that was certainly the younger folks. Now we see that when we looked at the early results coming in from Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, 8 in 10 African Americans supported Joe Biden's candidacy. And man, it's just amazing to me, especially considering the fact that so many African Americans are supporting him because of some of the policies in which he's been an architect for, has contributed to some of the despairs we've seen in the community. I know there's people like Charlemagne the God, which I know Kennedy knows very well, who often talks about the 86 crack laws, the 94 crime bill, and I think that's part of the reason why we see younger African Americans, those specifically 35 and under, who are willing to give Bernie Sanders a shot and not Joe Biden, because they understand it. However, when I mention those questions to older African Americans in South Carolina, what do you think about those two issues, policy issues? They say, you know what, I'm willing to forgive him. And that tells the story that older African Americans, especially those from the South, are more willing to be forgiven versus some of the younger folks who are a bit more critical on those policy issues, especially because they weren't really around during those times.
All right, I thought you were talking about King Charlemagne, but thank you for clarifying that. Let me pass along something that's caused a dust-up with maybe in the Democratic race. In the race here, Ilhan Omar tweeting out, imagine if the progressives consolidated last night like the moderates consolidated. Who would have won? That's what we should be analyzing. I feel confident a united progressive movement would have allowed for us to build together and win Minnesota and other states we narrowly lost. What she is kind of citing, or who she's citing, seems to be Elizabeth Warren, that she's stuck in the race, divided that progressive vote. What do you think of that?
Right. You know what? Interestingly enough, I think that's actually right. If you look at, I believe it was Maine in 2016, Minnesota in 2016, Bernie Sanders, when it was a two-person race, him and Hillary Clinton specifically, he did tremendously well. Now you look at the numbers and you see Elizabeth Warren really took a big chunk out of what that vote total could have been, because they share such a similar base. And that's a part of the reason why I think probably Elizabeth Warren, after tonight, she's going to probably come to some conclusions, and maybe tomorrow or the next day or whatever, come around and actually support Bernie Sanders, which will give him a bit more momentum, and certainly when we're putting in a political calculus as in terms of what his vote count might be in terms of delegates, he'll do far better against a Joe Biden, because as we're seeing, this is turning into a two-person race.
What do you think of that guy? The field clears.
There is a special place in hell for women who don't support other women, Ilhan. But I think she's being very aggressive toward Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has every right to stay in this race. She has her beliefs. She feels that she is following part of Hillary Clinton's roadmap, and the Democrat Party is not going to survive this fight for another round. They are not. They cannot have progressives versus moderates again in 2024. They have to make some decisions. And, you know, she's saying you have to unite behind the progressive movement. That has to be its own party. That's just the way it is. The two-party system is far too constraining for the number of ideologies that we have and we should have in this country. People should have a proliferation of beliefs, and two sizes do not fit all.
I'm not sure she's completely right, actually, anyway, because I think we'll have to look in detail, and again, so much is going to come down to California, but if you add Bloomberg's, I mean, Bloomberg is probably going to end up with more delegates tonight. Well, we'll see what happens in California. But
and there's a guy dividing that moderate vote.
He's dividing the moderate vote. So if he does go, and I think he probably will, then those votes are going to go heavily to Joe Biden. So I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that.
I think they cancel each other out. I think Elizabeth Warren and Bloomberg, if they both drop out, cancel each other out, and we're still at the same kind of place that we would be otherwise.
Gianna, I know you were at the Reagan Library and promoting your book. It's a great book, and you make the argument.
Hundreds of people showed up. Thank you.
Wow. And that, you know, the president was tweeting about your book and everything else. But you make a very compelling case that African-American voters just might do what Senator Tim Scott and others have said and turn out in bigger numbers for the president this go-round. What do you think?
You know what, and this is what's so interesting, Neil, because we're obviously talking about a Democratic primary. Independents hadn't yet gotten a chance to raise their voice, and certainly not conservatives. But I do believe, considering the fact that this president has committed to policies, not in just rhetoric, as we've seen with other folks like Joe Biden and other contenders for the presidency, or even the former President Barack Obama himself, hadn't contributed to policies that had created a positive impact for African Americans. This president has a list of deliverables in which he can talk to African Americans about. And for those who are willing to listen, which I think there's a lot of folks who are more interested in hearing somebody who's actually willing to do something, not just talk about it, because African Americans have been taken for granted. This president now can say, this is what I've done after 4 years, and look what the other party hasn't done.
Maybe things could change. Gianna, thank you very much. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
All right, Mike Bloomberg, we're told, is reassessing his campaign, or at least looking at some cutback ad buys. What to make of that after this? All right, I want to go back to my wonderful panel. They've been very patient, very strong throughout this evening, get their take on this. You know, futures markets are up, guys, and, you know, having somewhat to do with this, and maybe this notion that Bernie Sanders isn't a lock. Is that a correct assumption to have? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I suspect futures markets are moving more on, you know, people positioning themselves ahead of more news on coronavirus. I did see.
And we overdid it today. You can make that.
By the way, I think we got some more numbers out of South Korea tonight, another 500 cases of coronavirus. So I think there's just uncertainty, and people are probably positioning themselves for that. But I think the big message out of tonight is Joe-mentum is real. He's had an extraordinary turnaround from a week ago when everybody said he was dead. At the same time, I still think, and we'll wait and see what happens in California particularly, I don't think Bert Sanders is dead, as I think some people are tending to write him off tonight. We've got a long way to go in the campaign. As I said earlier, Biden is a gaffe machine, and you know this is going to go on for another couple of months, probably at least, and you don't know what's going to happen, and there's going to be some consolidation. Maybe Bloomberg will be out, maybe Warren will be out. Biden definitely has the momentum, but this is going to go for a while yet.
Can I add something to that? Because Biden's reputation and his numbers really took a hit during impeachment, because he was really tied to the Ukraine story, as was his son. And it's very interesting because we haven't heard anything about Hunter Hunter Biden, and that is certainly 100% intentional. I don't think the gaffes, you know, we talked about it a little bit. People who like their candidate are much more forgiving
They will accept them
of their
gaffes and all.
personal
I fully
flaws.
agree with that.
Absolutely. But
Fully agree.
if there is, for some reason, another Ukrainian shoe that drops, and there might be, you never know, everything is so weird, that could hurt
It's
Joe
all
Biden.
right.
But I think you're right about the futures, is investors are looking that's going, oh, great, we're not stuck with a complete psychopath.
I did not
also-
say that, but I
Let's
mean,
also just take a look at the fact that over 50% of the people made their decision in the last 24
That
hours.
amazes me.
That means that people aren't forgiving of Joe Biden. They're not so excited about Joe Biden. They voted for Joe Biden because they think he can win. Now he needs to prove it to the people that he can win. And
They
I'm
also
not so
can't
sure.
be bought by Michael Bloomberg money bags.
There you go. They can't do
But
that
he's
either.
not finished yet. I mean,
But
you
I
know,
think-
it's possible he scores some, you know, gets over 100 delegates when all is said and done.
I think the system is going to have to absorb what just happened with Joe Biden and have to decide, is this going to be something
Fair
that's
enough.
going to continue beyond Super Tuesday?
All right, you guys are all great. You too, Kennedy. But a great read on things. Outstanding senses of humor, all, and that does come in handy. We simply cannot call Maine and Texas. We will continue looking at those. But a good night for Joe Biden, I think, as all my guests were saying here. 72 hours ago, no one saw this coming. In fact, 72 hours ago, they didn't see him surviving this night. That was then. Look at now.